The gunshot that split the Colorado sky wasn't meant to kill, it was meant to silence witnesses. Eliza Hartwell lay bleeding in the dirt of Redwood Crossing's main street, her crime nothing more than saying no to the wrong man. Vernon Pike owned this town, the bank, the law, the fear that kept decent people quiet. But when a stranger's shadow fell across her broken body, when leather boots planted themselves between her and certain death, everything changed. One cowboy. One promise spoken into deadly silence. He won't touch her again. In a place where power meant everything and mercy meant nothing, Defiance had just declared war. If you're ready for a story of courage, rising from the dust, of love born in the shadow of violence, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far this tale of frontier justice travels. The late afternoon sun turned Redwood Crossing's main street into a river of amber dust. Eliza Hartwell carried 2 bolts of calico fabric under one arm, and her account ledger tucked against her ribs as she navigated the boardwalk outside Hartwell Mercantile. The store had been her father's before consumption took him 6 months back. Now it was hers, along with his debts, his dreams, and the weight of keeping both alive in a town that didn't much care for women who refused to know their place. She was reaching for the door handle when she heard the boots behind her. Heavy, deliberate, the kind of footsteps that wanted to be heard. "Miss Hartwell." Eliza's spine stiffened. She didn't need to turn around to know who stood behind her. Vernon Pike's voice carried the smooth confidence of a man who'd never been told no in his entire life, and the edge of someone who wouldn't tolerate hearing it now. "Mr. Pike." She kept her tone neutral, professional as she faced him. "If you're here about the loan extension, I've already spoken with Mr. Garrett at the bank. This isn't about business, Eliza." Vernon removed his hat, revealing oil-slicked hair and a smile that never reached his cold blue eyes. "Though I suppose everything's business in its way. I'm here to make you an offer, a personal one." Eliza's fingers tightened on the fabric bolts. Vernon Pike stood just under 6 feet, dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than most folks in Redwood Crossing earned in a year. At 42, he owned the largest ranch in the territory, held controlling interest in the bank, and had the sheriff in his pocket so deep the man might as well have been spare change. Power radiated from him like heat from a stove, and just as likely to burn anyone who got too close. "I'm not interested in personal offers, Mr. Pike. If you'll excuse me." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist before she could turn away. Not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to make his point. "You haven't heard what I'm offering yet." "Dinner. Tomorrow evening. My ranch. We can discuss your father's outstanding loans, the future of this store, and perhaps come to an understanding." The words hung between them like smoke. Around them, the street had gone quiet. Eliza felt eyes watching from windows, from doorways, from the shadows of awnings. People in Redwood Crossing had learned to look away when Vernon Pike wanted something. Looking away kept you safe, kept you employed, kept you breathing. But Eliza had inherited more than her father's mercantile. She'd inherited his stubborn streak, his belief that some things mattered more than safety, and his bone-deep certainty that a person's worth wasn't measured by how well they bowed. "No." She pulled her wrist free, stepping back. "I don't need your understanding, Mr. Pike. I need you to leave me alone." For one heartbeat, Vernon's mask slipped. Behind the gentleman's smile lurked something cold and cruel, something that saw people as obstacles to be removed or tools to be used. Then the smile returned, harder now, with teeth showing. "You're making a mistake, Eliza, a costly one. Your father made mistakes too. Perhaps that's why he's not here to guide you now." The words hit like a slap. "What did you say?" "I said your father was a foolish man who didn't know when to accept help from his betters. Don't make his mistakes." Vernon replaced his hat, adjusting it with calculated precision. "You have 24 hours to reconsider. After that, I'll be forced to take a harder look at those outstanding loans. Would be a shame if the bank had to foreclose on such a charming establishment." He turned to leave, boots echoing on the boardwalk. Eliza stood frozen, rage and fear warring in her chest. The fabric bolt slipped from her grip, tumbling to the wooden planks with soft thuds that sounded like defeat. "Mr. Pike." Vernon paused, glancing back with raised eyebrows. Eliza lifted her chin, her voice carrying clear across the silent street. My answer is no. It will be no tomorrow, and it will be no every day after that. I'd rather lose everything my father built than sell myself to a man like you. The silence that followed pressed down like a physical weight. Somewhere a horse nickered, a shop door creaked, but no one spoke. No one moved. Vernon Pike's face went blank, empty of everything except cold calculation. He walked back toward her with measured steps, and Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd gone too far, pushed too hard. In a town owned by one man, defiance didn't just cost you, it destroyed you. A man like me, Vernon said softly, stopping just inches away. And what kind of man is that, Miss Hartwell? The kind who owns half this territory? The kind who keeps this town running, who provides employment, who maintains order? Or perhaps you mean the kind of man who doesn't tolerate disrespect from ungrateful merchants who seem to have forgotten exactly who holds the note on their property. The kind of man, Eliza said, her voice shaking but steady, who threatens women in the street when they won't surrender to him. That kind. She saw his hand move before she could react. Not a slap. Vernon was too careful for that, too aware of appearances. Instead, he reached out and gripped her shoulders, fingers digging in as he shoved her backward. Hard. Eliza stumbled off the boardwalk, her boots catching the edge. She fell, hitting the dusty street with an impact that knocked the breath from her lungs. Pain exploded up her hip, her palms scraping against rough dirt and scattered pebbles. The account ledger spilled open, pages fluttering in the breeze like broken wings. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard Vernon's voice, calm and clear. You'll learn some respect, Miss Hartwell. One way or another. The gunshot shattered the afternoon quiet like breaking glass. Eliza flinched, instinct making her curl inward even as her mind struggled to process what was happening. The shot hadn't been aimed at her, it had been fired into the air, a punctuation mark, a warning. Vernon stood on the boardwalk above her, his hand still near the revolver at his hip, smoke curling from the barrel. Anyone who didn't see a clumsy woman trip and fall, Vernon announced to the street, his voice carrying to every watching window, every hidden observer, might want to reconsider what they think they saw. Accidents happen all the time in Redwood Crossing, some worse than others. Eliza pushed herself up on shaking arms, tasting blood where she'd bitten her lip. Her vision swam, but through the tears she could see people turning away, doors closing, curtains falling back into place. Fear had won again. It always did in this town. Then a shadow fell across her, blocking out the sun. Ma'am! The voice was deep, quiet, with the kind of calm that came from a man who'd seen violence and wasn't impressed by its posturing. Let me help you up. A hand appeared in her line of vision, calloused, scarred across the knuckles, steady as stone. Eliza looked up past the hand to the man offering it. He was tall, lean in the way of men who lived hard and traveled light. His face was weathered by sun and wind, marked by a thin scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. Dark hair showed beneath the brim of a dusty hat, and his eyes, gray as winter sky, held something she hadn't seen in Redwood Crossing for a long time. Absolute certainty. I can manage, she started to say, but her voice came out weak, defeated. I know you can. His tone didn't change, didn't carry pity or judgment. But you don't have to. She took his hand. His grip was firm, careful, lifting her to her feet with an ease that suggested considerable strength held deliberately in check. He steadied her, one hand at her elbow, waiting until she found her balance before releasing her. You're making another mistake, friend. Vernon's voice sliced through the moment, sharp with warning. That woman just took a fall, nothing more. No need for heroics. The stranger didn't look at Vernon. He brushed dust from Eliza's sleeve with methodical movements, then bent to retrieve her scattered ledger, collecting loose pages with the same careful attention. Only after he'd placed the book in her hands did he turn to face Vernon Pike. Saw the whole thing, he said quietly. Didn't look like a fall to me. Vernon's hand drifted toward his revolver. Then you need your eyes checked, stranger, or maybe you need to learn how things work in Redwood Crossing before you go making accusations you can't back up. Wasn't an accusation. The stranger's voice remained level, conversational almost, but his posture had shifted, weight balanced, hand hanging loose near his own weapon. Just an observation. Like observing that a man who pushes women around in broad daylight probably doesn't stop there, or that a town scared enough to pretend not to see it has bigger problems than one merchant's debts. The street had gone silent again, but this was a different kind of silence. This wasn't the heavy quiet of fear. This was the held breath tension of watching two wolves circle each other, waiting to see which one would bare teeth first. "You've got a mouth on you," Vernon said softly. "In my experience, men with mouths like that don't last long in territories like this. Accidents happen, after all." "So I've heard." The stranger tilted his head slightly, a gesture that might have been agreement or mockery. "Funny thing about accidents, though, they tend to happen to people who don't see them coming, people who think they're untouchable, people who mistake fear for loyalty and power for safety." Vernon's face had gone dark, a vein pulsing at his temple. "You don't know who you're talking to, friend." "Vernon Pike. Own the biggest ranch hereabouts. Control the bank. Got the law in your pocket." The stranger's gray eyes never blinked. "And you're used to getting what you want because nobody's willing to tell you different. That about cover it? Then you know enough to walk away." Vernon's hand closed around his revolver grip. "While you still can." The stranger smiled, a thin, cold expression that held no humor. "See, that's where you're wrong. I know exactly enough to stay right here." He stepped forward, positioning himself between Eliza and Vernon with deliberate intent. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't a challenge exactly, just a man choosing where to stand and making it clear he had no intention of moving. "The lady said no," the stranger continued in that same quiet tone. "Said it clear in public. Now she's bleeding because she had the courage to stand by her word. So here's how this goes, Mr. Pike. You're going to tip your hat, apologize for the accident, and walk away. And from now on, when she says no, you're going to respect it." "Or what?" Vernon's voice dripped venom. The stranger's hand moved, not to his weapon, but to push back his coat, revealing a tied-down holster and a well-maintained Colt Peacemaker. The gesture was casual, conversational, the way another man might adjust his hat. But the message rang clear as church bells. "Or I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." The words carried absolute certainty, the kind of promise that didn't need volume to be heard. "Your choice, Mr. Pike. Make it quick." Eliza's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She wanted to speak, to tell this stranger he didn't understand what he was doing, who he was threatening, what it would cost him. Vernon Pike didn't forgive, didn't forget. Men who crossed him ended up ruined, run out of town, or worse, found face down in the creek with a belly full of whiskey and questions nobody wanted answered. But the words stuck in her throat, because the stranger's steady presence felt like the first solid ground she'd stood on since her father died. Like maybe, just maybe, someone in this godforsaken town still believed that right mattered more than power. Vernon's fingers twitched on his revolver, the moment stretched taut as wire, ready to snap, ready to spill blood in the dusty street. Then Vernon laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "You're a dead man, friend. You just don't know it yet." He turned on his heel and stalked toward his horse, hitched outside the bank across the street. But before mounting, he looked back one last time, his gaze fixed on Eliza. 24 hours, Miss Hartwell. Think carefully about whose protection you want to rely on. A stranger who will be gone by morning, or the man who decides whether this town prospers or starves. He swung into the saddle with practiced ease, wheeling his horse around and spurring it into a canter that sent dust billowing in his wake. Eliza released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Her knees went weak, and she gripped the stranger's arm without thinking, needing something solid to keep from falling again. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "You have no idea what you've just brought down on yourself." The stranger, she still didn't know his name, looked down at her with those winter-gray eyes, and for the first time she saw something behind the calm. Not fear, not anger, just a bone-deep weariness, like a man who'd carried the same burden so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to set it down. "Probably not," he agreed. "Seems to be a habit of mine. But I meant what I said, ma'am. He won't touch you again." "You can't promise that. Nobody can stand against Vernon Pike. He owns everything, controls everyone. If you stay in this town, you're signing your own death warrant." A ghost of a smile crossed his scarred face. Wouldn't be the first time. Come on, let's get you inside before you collapse in the street. You're shaking like a newborn colt. He was right. Adrenaline was draining from her system, leaving her cold and trembling despite the warm afternoon. She let him guide her toward the mercantile's entrance, aware of faces appearing in windows again now that the immediate danger had passed. Watching, judging, calculating what this confrontation would cost them all. Inside the store, familiar scents wrapped around her. Leather, coffee, dried herbs, the faint mustiness of bolt fabric. Her father's domain, now hers. The stranger settled her into the chair behind the counter, then moved with surprising familiarity to the small stove in the corner where she kept a kettle. "You know your way around a mercantile," she observed, watching him work. "Spent time in enough of them." He found cups, measured tea leaves with careful precision, though usually from the customer side of the counter. "I don't even know your name." "Caleb Rourke." He brought her the tea, steam curling from the cup. "And you're Eliza Hartwell, daughter of Thomas Hartwell, proprietor of this establishment, deceased 6 months back from consumption. You're 26, unmarried, and currently in debt to the bank for approximately $3,000. Money your father borrowed to expand inventory before he took ill." Eliza's hands froze on the teacup. "How do you know all that?" "Small towns talk. Spent a few days in the saloon, doing odd jobs, listening to gossip." Caleb pulled up a stool across from her, his long frame folding with an economy of movement. "Heard about Vernon Pike, too. About his interest in the pretty merchant's daughter. About the debts coming due and the pressure mounting." "Then you know you just made yourself his enemy for no good reason. I'm nobody worth protecting. That a fact?" Caleb's gray eyes held hers steadily. "Looked like somebody worth protecting from where I was standing. Looked like someone with enough spine to stand up when the whole town was sitting down." "Spine doesn't pay debts, Mr. Rourke, and it certainly doesn't stop Vernon Pike when he decides to crush someone. My father learned that lesson. I'm learning it now. You'll learn it too, if you're fool enough to stay." Caleb was quiet for a moment, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. "Your father's death," he said finally. "That really consumption?" The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through everything Eliza thought she knew. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything, ma'am. I'm asking, because in my experience, men like Vernon Pike don't waste time on long campaigns when a short solution presents itself. Your father refused to sell this place, didn't he? Refused to partner with Pike, refused to let him buy controlling interest." Eliza's throat tightened. "He was sick for months, wasting away. The doctor said—" "What did the doctor say exactly?" She opened her mouth to respond, then stopped, because now that she thought about it, really thought about it, Dr. Brennan had been strangely vague. Symptoms consistent with consumption, he'd said, progressive weakness, difficulty breathing, but he'd never confirmed it definitively. And he'd discouraged her from seeking a second opinion, said travel would only worsen her father's condition. Dr. Brennan, who treated Vernon Pike's ranch hands and depended on Pike's patronage. "Oh God," she whispered, "you think Vernon—" "I think," Caleb interrupted gently, "that you should be careful. I think Vernon Pike wants something from you, and he's not the kind of man who takes no for an answer. And I think that stranger or not, dead man walking or not, I'm not leaving you alone to face whatever comes next." "Why?" The word burst out before she could stop it. "Why would you risk yourself for someone you don't even know? This isn't your fight, Mr. Rourke. This isn't your town. You could ride out right now and forget any of this happened." Caleb stood, moving to the window where he could watch the street. Afternoon light caught the scar on his face, making it stand out stark and white against weathered skin. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of old pain, old regrets. 5 years back, I was hunting a man named Jack Corrigan. Outlaw, murderer, cattle thief. Had a bounty on his head big enough to set me up for a year. Tracked him to a little settlement in New Mexico territory, place called Juniper Bend. He paused, his hand resting against the window frame. Corrigan was holed up there, protected by a local rancher who valued loyalty over law. Town was terrified of both of them. I could see it in their faces, same look I saw on these people's faces today. Fear so deep it had turned to acceptance. "What happened?" Eliza asked, though part of her didn't want to know. "I watched," Caleb said quietly. The rancher was squeezing a widow for her land. She had a boy, maybe 10 years old, and she was fighting to keep their home. I told myself it wasn't my business. I was there for Corrigan, not to play hero for every hard luck case I came across. His jaw tightened. Corrigan heard about my presence, ran before I could take him, and that night the widow's house burned. She got the boy out, but barely. Lost everything: home, land, hope. Last I heard, she was working in a brothel in Santa Fe, and the boy was running with outlaws. Silence filled the mercantile, heavy and complete. Outside, the street was returning to normal. People moving, conducting business, pretending the violence of an hour ago had never happened. I could have stopped it, Caleb said. Could have stood between her and that rancher the way I stood between you and Pike today, but I didn't. Told myself it wasn't my fight. He turned from the window, and Eliza saw something raw and broken in his expression. Been carrying that choice ever since. So when I see a woman being pushed down in the street, when I see a whole town too afraid to help her up, I don't get the luxury of walking away anymore, because I know exactly what happens when good people stand by and do nothing. Eliza's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. You can't save everyone, Mr. Rourke. No, ma'am, but I can save somebody. Might as well be the one brave enough to say no when the whole world's saying yes. A knock on the door made them both turn. Through the glass, Eliza could see Martha Chen, who ran the boarding house 2 streets over. The older woman's face was tight with worry as Eliza opened the door. Miss Hartwell. Martha glanced past her to Caleb, then back. Are you all right? I saw what happened. Vernon Pike has no right. I'm fine, Mrs. Chen. Thank you for checking. Martha's lips pursed. You're not fine, child. None of us are fine in a town run by a man like that. But I wanted you to know, some of us haven't forgotten what your father did for this community. Haven't forgotten how he extended credit when times were hard, how he stood up to Pike's land grabs, how he believed in people. She pulled a small cloth bag from her apron pocket. It's not much, just what I could spare. But your father helped me keep my boarding house when the bank tried to foreclose 3 years back. This is part of paying that debt. Eliza opened the bag to find a collection of coins and small bills, maybe $40 in total. Mrs. Chen, I can't accept. You can and you will, and you're going to hear from others too, whether they're brave enough to visit in person or not. This town owes Thomas Hartwell's daughter better than abandonment. Martha's gaze shifted to Caleb. And we owe thanks to men with enough backbone to stand when standing costs something. She left before Eliza could respond, disappearing down the boardwalk with quick, nervous steps. Seems you're not as alone as you thought, Caleb observed. Eliza stared at the money in her hands, this tangible proof that somewhere under the fear, under the silence, threads of decency still existed in Redwood Crossing. It won't be enough. Even if everyone who owed my father a kindness contributed, it wouldn't cover what I owe the bank. And Vernon won't stop with financial pressure. He'll find other ways. He always does. Then we'll handle those too. We? Eliza looked up sharply. There is no we, Mr. Rourke. You fulfilled whatever moral obligation brought you to my defense. You can leave with your conscience clear. Caleb crossed his arms, settling his weight against the counter with the ease of a man preparing for a long conversation. I could, but I'm not going to. You need help running this store, protecting it, standing between you and whatever Pike sends next. I need work, a place to stay, and a reason to be in town that doesn't raise too many questions. Seems like a fair arrangement to me. I can't pay you. Room and board'll do fine. Got a room upstairs, don't you? And you're probably cooking for one anyway. Won't cost much more to feed two. This is insane. But even as Eliza said it, part of her was calculating. Having Caleb here would change the dynamic. Vernon might hesitate before making another move, might worry about witnesses, about complications. It could buy her time to figure out a real solution. And if she was honest with herself, the thought of not being alone anymore, of having someone to watch her back, to share the burden, made something tight and anxious in her chest finally ease. Probably, Caleb agreed. Most worthwhile things are. What do you say, Miss Hartwell? You willing to take a chance on a drifter with a bad habit of picking fights he can't win? Eliza looked at this stranger who'd stepped between her and destruction, who carried his own ghosts and regrets, who'd offered protection when the world had offered only fear. She thought about her father, who'd believed that some things mattered more than safety, who'd taught her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was the choice to stand anyway. "Call me Eliza," she said. "And yes, Mr. Rourke, I'll take that chance." "Caleb," he corrected, "and you won't regret it." But even as he spoke, even as something like hope flickered in Eliza's chest, she couldn't shake the memory of Vernon Pike's parting words. 24 hours. The clock was already ticking. That night, Eliza lay awake in her room above the Mercantile, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person in her home. Caleb had taken the small room at the end of the hall, barely more than a closet, with space for a narrow bed and little else. But he'd settled in with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to travel light and expect nothing. She heard him moving now, footsteps crossing the floor. Not pacing, something more purposeful. After a moment, curiosity drew her from bed. She pulled a shawl over her nightgown and padded down the hall. The door to Caleb's room stood open. Inside, lamplight revealed him sitting on the edge of the bed, his shirt removed, exposing a torso marked with old scars. He was cleaning his revolver with methodical care, each movement precise and practiced. "Can't sleep either?" His voice held no surprise at her presence. "Wondering if I've made a terrible mistake." Eliza leaned against the door frame. "Wondering if my stubbornness is going to get us both killed." Caleb looked up from his weapon, gray eyes unreadable in the lamplight. "Your stubbornness is the only thing keeping you alive. Vernon Pike wants you broken, compliant, grateful for whatever crumbs he tosses. You refuse to break. That makes you dangerous to him." "And you? What makes you dangerous?" A faint smile crossed his scarred face. "Experience, mostly. I know what men like Pike do, how they think, where they're vulnerable. And I know that for all his power, all his money, he's still just a man. Men can be stopped." "Can they? Or do they just get replaced by the next tyrant in line?" Caleb set down the cloth he'd been using, giving her his full attention. "That's the question, isn't it? Whether anything we do matters in the long run. Whether standing up changes anything or just gets good people hurt. What do you think?" "I think," he said slowly, "that every time someone says no when the world expects yes, it matters. Maybe not in ways we can see right away. Maybe not enough to topple empires or transform societies. But it matters to the person who says it. It matters to the people watching who need to see that defiance is possible. And sometimes, if we're lucky, it matters enough to shift the balance just a little, to make the next no a little easier to say." Eliza pulled her shawl tighter, though the night wasn't cold. "My father used to say something similar. He believed in the long fight, the slow change. But it killed him in the end." "Maybe. Or maybe he's the reason you had the strength to stand up today. The reason Mrs. Chen came by with money and gratitude. The reason some part of this town still remembers what it means to choose right over easy." Caleb's gaze held hers steadily. "Death comes for all of us eventually, Eliza. The only choice we get is what we stand for before it does." They stood in silence for a long moment, two people bound by circumstance and choice, by stubbornness and old pain. Then Eliza nodded slowly. "Get some sleep, Caleb. Tomorrow's going to be difficult." "Tomorrow and all the days after," he agreed. But he said it without fear, without regret. Just a man acknowledging what he'd chosen and accepting the cost. Eliza returned to her room, but sleep remained elusive. Outside her window, Redwood Crossing lay quiet under cold stars. Somewhere in that darkness, Vernon Pike was planning his next move. And somewhere in the small room down the hall, a scarred gunslinger sat watch, a stranger who'd become her only ally in a war she hadn't chosen but could no longer avoid. The 24 hours had begun. Dawn broke gray and uncertain over Redwood Crossing, the kind of morning that promised nothing good. Eliza woke to the smell of coffee and found Caleb already downstairs, moving through the Mercantile's back room, with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to making himself useful. He'd swept the floor, reorganized the stacked crates that had been blocking the door to the storage cellar, and somehow managed to coax the temperamental stove into producing both coffee and something that smelled remarkably like bacon. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, tying her apron as she descended the stairs. "Needed something to occupy my hands." Caleb poured her a cup of coffee, his movement steady despite what must have been minimal sleep. Besides, figured if we're partners in this enterprise, might as well make myself useful. Found a leak in the back corner, water damage on some of those fabric bolts. Moved them before it spread. Partners. The word settled between them with unexpected weight. Eliza accepted the coffee, wrapping both hands around the warm cup. Through the mercantile's front windows, she could see the street coming to life. Shopkeepers opening their doors, ranch hands heading toward the livery, the daily rhythm of a town pretending yesterday's violence had never happened. 24 hours, she murmured. Vernon gave me until this afternoon. Then we've got time. Caleb cracked eggs into a pan with practiced ease. Question is, what do we do with it? Before Eliza could answer, a sharp knock rattled the front door. Through the glass, she recognized Sheriff Tom Garrett's bulky silhouette, his badge catching early morning light. Her stomach dropped. That didn't take long, Caleb observed, his tone mild but his hand drifting toward the revolver at his hip. Let me handle this. Eliza set down her coffee and moved to unlock the door. Sheriff Garrett, you're out early. Tom Garrett had the weathered face of a man who'd spent too many years choosing comfort over conscience. He'd been a decent lawman once, or so her father had claimed, before Vernon Pike's money and influence had turned him into something else. Now he stood on her threshold looking uncomfortable, his hat in his hands, eyes not quite meeting hers. Miss Hartwell, I'm here on official business. Need to have a word about yesterday's incident. What incident would that be, Sheriff? The one where Vernon Pike assaulted me in broad daylight, or the one where he threatened witnesses with a loaded weapon? Garrett's jaw tightened. Now, that's not how Mr. Pike describes it. Says you lost your balance, took a tumble. Says he fired his weapon to scare off a stray dog that was bothering you. Says this stranger, his gaze shifted to Caleb, who'd appeared in the doorway to the back room, made unfounded accusations and threatened him without cause. That's an interesting interpretation of events. Caleb's voice carried no inflection, stating facts without emotion. Leaves out the part where Pike shoved her off the boardwalk because she refused his dinner invitation. Leaves out the part where he used that gunshot to silence witnesses. Leaves out quite a bit, actually. You're new here, friend. Don't know how things work in Redwood Crossing. We keep the peace by not stirring up trouble over misunderstandings. And who decides what counts as a misunderstanding, Sheriff? You or Vernon Pike? Garrett's face flushed. I decide. I'm the law in this town. Then do your job. Caleb stepped fully into the main room, his presence somehow making the space feel smaller, more charged. Arrest Vernon Pike for assault. Take statements from witnesses. Investigate the crime that happened right there on Main Street in front of half the town. There's no crime to investigate. Mr. Pike is a respected citizen, a pillar of this community. He's a bully with money. The words came out flat and cold. And you're the man who helps him get away with it because standing up to him costs more than you're willing to pay. The sheriff's hand moved toward his own weapon, years of instinct overriding caution. But Caleb didn't react, didn't tense, didn't give Garrett anything to justify drawing. He just stood there, gray eyes steady, waiting. Sheriff. Eliza's voice cut through the tension. Was there something else? Because if you're not here to take my statement about being assaulted, I have a business to run. Garrett turned back to her, his expression caught between anger and something that might have been shame. I'm here to warn you, Miss Hartwell. Mr. Pike is a patient man, but his patience has limits. He's willing to overlook yesterday's misunderstanding if you come to your senses. But if you continue down this path, if you keep refusing his very generous offers, there will be consequences. Is that a threat, Sheriff? It's a reality. Your father's debts come due in 3 weeks. The bank holds the note on this property. Mr. Pike sits on the bank's board. Do the arithmetic. I'm aware of my financial obligations. Eliza lifted her chin, refusing to let him see her fear. I'm also aware that my father paid his taxes, followed every law, and never missed a payment until illness made it impossible. If the bank wants to foreclose, they'll have to follow proper procedures, and I'll fight them every step of the way. You'll lose. Maybe, but I'll lose on my feet, not on my knees. Garrett looked at her for a long moment, something like regret flickering across his weathered features. You're your father's daughter, all right, stubborn to the bone. It got him killed, Miss Hartwell. Think hard before you let it kill you, too. He turned to leave, but Caleb's voice stopped him at the door. Sheriff, That sounded an awful lot like you just confirmed Thomas Hartwell didn't die of natural causes. Garrett's shoulders stiffened, but he didn't turn around. I didn't confirm anything. Man was sick. These things happen. They do indeed, especially to people who get in Vernon Pike's way. The sheriff left without another word, his boots heavy on the boardwalk. Eliza watched him cross the street, heading toward the bank where no doubt Vernon was already waiting to hear how his intimidation had landed. Your father, Caleb said quietly. You really think Pike had him killed? Eliza moved to the window, watching morning light paint the street gold. I think my father was healthy 6 months ago. I think he started coughing blood 2 weeks after refusing to sell this building to Vernon Pike. I think Dr. Brennan, who depends on Pike's patronage, was the only physician who ever examined him, and I think Sheriff Garrett just as much as admitted that my father's death wasn't natural. We need proof. Proof died with my father. If Vernon poisoned him, he did it slowly, carefully, in ways that mimicked natural illness. Even if we exhumed the body, what would we find? He's been in the ground half a year. Caleb was silent, his scarred face unreadable. Then, there's always proof. Men like Pike get sloppy when they feel untouchable. He's been running this town so long he probably doesn't even try to hide his tracks anymore. We just have to know where to look. And how do you propose we do that? Same way you solve any problem. Break it down, look at the pieces, find the weak points. Caleb moved to the counter, pulling out a piece of paper and a pencil. Pike controls the bank, the law, the biggest ranch in the territory. But he doesn't control everything. There are always cracks in empires like his, people he's wronged, debts he can't collect, secrets he needs kept. We find those cracks, we apply pressure, and we watch his carefully constructed power start to crumble. Liza stared at him, this stranger who talked about toppling local tyrants as casually as some men discussed the weather. You've done this before. Once or twice. Usually doesn't end well for anyone involved, but sometimes it's necessary anyway. Why? The question burst out before she could stop it. Why risk yourself for this? For me. You said you couldn't save everyone, so why try to save a failing mercantile in a town you don't even care about? Caleb set down the pencil, his gray eyes meeting hers with unsettling directness. Because if I don't try here, where do I try? If not for you, then for who? I've spent 5 years drifting from town to town, telling myself other people's problems aren't my burden to carry. But that woman in Juniper Bend still haunts my sleep. Her boy's face still shows up in my nightmares. I can't undo those failures, but maybe I can stop making new ones. Before Eliza could respond, the mercantile door opened again. This time it was Marcus Webb, who owned the saddle shop 3 doors down. He was a compact man with a weathered face and hands scarred from decades of leather work. He glanced nervously at the street before stepping inside. Miss Hartwell, got a minute? Of course, Mr. Webb. What can I do for you? Marcus pulled an envelope from his coat pocket, pressing it into her hands with quick, furtive movements. Your father staked me when I was starting out, gave me credit when no one else would, believed in my work when I was nobody. Figure it's time I paid some of that forward. The envelope contained $100, more than Marcus probably had to spare. I can't accept this. You have your own family to feed. Already fed and then some. Business has been good, thanks to the foundation your father helped me build. This is what decent people do, Eliza. We help each other. His eyes cut to Caleb, assessing. You the fellow who stood up to Pike yesterday? Just a man who saw something wrong and decided to do something about it. Marcus nodded slowly. Town could use more men like that. Could use more people willing to stand, period. He turned back to Eliza. You should know, Pike's already putting pressure on folks. Sent word through the bank that anyone who helps you might find their own loans called in early. Anyone who takes your side might discover their business is suddenly facing unexpected difficulties. Then you shouldn't have come here. Eliza tried to hand back the envelope, but Marcus stepped away, shaking his head. Girl, I've been letting fear make my decisions for too long. Watching Vernon Pike squeeze this town tighter every year, never saying a word because I had too much to lose. Well, maybe some things are worth losing for. Maybe standing with Thomas Hartwell's daughter is one of them. He left quickly, before she could argue further. Eliza stared at the envelope, feeling the weight of it. Not just the money, but the risk, the defiance, the courage it represented. Your father built something here, Caleb observed. Not just a business, a network of debts and gratitude, of people who remember kindness. That's more valuable than any amount of money Vernon Pike controls. It's also going to get them hurt. Eliza's voice came out strained. Pike will destroy anyone who helps me. He'll ruin them financially, run them out of town, or worse. I can't let people sacrifice themselves for my stubbornness. That their choice or yours? What? Caleb leaned against the counter, his expression serious. You're deciding what risks other people are allowed to take. Deciding that Marcus Webb doesn't get to choose honor over safety, that Mrs. Chen doesn't get to repay old debts. You're making their choices for them, same way Vernon Pike does, just with better intentions. The words hit harder than Eliza expected. That's not fair. Isn't it? These people are adults. They know the risks. And they're choosing to stand with you anyway, because your father showed them that standing matters. Who are you to take that choice away from them? Eliza wanted to argue, to explain that protecting people from their own noble impulses was just common sense. But before she could formulate a response, another knock sounded at the door. This time it was Annie Cooper, barely 17, who worked at the boarding house. Then came old Samuel Hayes from the general store across the street. Then Margaret Sullivan, who ran the dress shop, and Jack Morrison, who worked at the livery. One by one, they came. Some with money, some with supplies, some with just words of support. Each visit was brief, furtive, conducted with nervous glances at the street. But each carried the same message. Thomas Hartwell had mattered. His daughter mattered. And Vernon Pike's reign of fear wasn't absolute. By mid-morning, Eliza had collected over $300 and enough provisions to keep the mercantile stocked for weeks. She sat at the counter, staring at the pile of envelopes and small bags, feeling something swell in her chest that might have been hope or might have been terror. She couldn't quite tell which. "This changes things," she whispered. "It does." Caleb had been watching the street through the window, tracking movements, cataloging faces. Pike's going to know about every person who came through that door. He's probably got someone watching right now, making a list. The question is, what's he going to do about it? The answer came 2 hours later, delivered by a boy who couldn't have been more than 12. He thrust a folded paper into Eliza's hands and ran before she could ask questions. The note was written in elegant script on expensive paper. "Miss Hartwell, your deadline has passed. Your answer is noted. I had hoped you would choose wisdom over pride, but I see I overestimated your intelligence. The bank will begin foreclosure proceedings tomorrow morning. You have 7 days to vacate the premises. As for those misguided souls who chose to support your foolishness, they will learn the cost of poor judgment." Starting with Marcus Webb. His lease comes due next week. I'm afraid the property owner has decided not to renew. This could have been so simple, Eliza. You could have accepted my protection, my generosity. Instead, you chose the hard path. Now you and everyone who stands with you will walk it together. There's still time to reconsider. Come to my ranch tonight, alone. We can discuss terms that might save your friends from the consequences of your stubbornness. The choice, as always, is yours. Vernon Pike. Eliza's hands shook as she read the words, not with fear, though fear was certainly present, with rage, pure incandescent fury at a man who thought people were chess pieces, who believed power gave him the right to destroy lives on a whim. He's going after them. She looked up at Caleb, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Everyone who helped me. He's going to systematically ruin them unless I surrender. Caleb took the note, read it quickly, then folded it with deliberate care. He's overplaying his hand, threatening too many people at once. That's the mistake we've been waiting for. How is this a mistake? He has all the power. He can do exactly what he's threatened. Power's an illusion, Eliza. It only works when people believe in it. Right now, Vernon Pike is so confident in his control that he's openly admitting to economic terrorism. He's putting his threats in writing, creating evidence of coercion and conspiracy. Caleb's gray eyes glinted with something cold and calculating. Men get sloppy when they feel untouchable. This note is proof of that. Proof that won't matter to a sheriff in Pike's pocket or a judge he probably owns. Maybe. But there are higher authorities than local law. Federal marshals, territorial governors. The kind of people who don't appreciate small-time tyrants making their jurisdictions look lawless and corrupt. Eliza wanted to believe him, wanted to think that justice existed somewhere beyond Redwood Crossing's compromised borders. But years of watching her father fight losing battles had taught her that idealism made a poor shield against practical power. Even if we could get word to federal authorities, even if they cared enough to investigate, it would take months. Vernon will have destroyed everyone who helped me long before any marshal arrives, and he knows it. Then we don't wait for federal intervention. Caleb moved to the door, scanning the street with sharp eyes. We go on offense. We find his vulnerabilities and we exploit them before he can make good on these threats. How? We don't have money, connections, or power. We have a pile of donations from terrified shopkeepers and one mercantile that's about to be foreclosed on. We have something better. Caleb turned back to her, and for the first time since they'd met, Eliza saw something dangerous in his expression. Not violence exactly, but the cold certainty of a man who knew how to fight and wasn't afraid of the cost. We have the truth, and we have people willing to stand for it. Vernon Pike has built his empire on fear and silence, so we break both. You're talking about open war. I'm talking about survival. Pike's already declared war, Eliza. We didn't start this fight, but we're damn sure going to finish it. Before she could respond, the sound of breaking glass shattered the afternoon quiet. They both moved to the window in time to see a rock bouncing across the mercantile's floor, wrapped in another note. Outside, a figure on horseback was already disappearing down the street, too far to identify, too fast to catch. Caleb retrieved the rock, unwrapping the paper with careful hands. This message was shorter, written in crude letters that suggested someone poorly educated or deliberately disguising their handwriting. Last warning. Leave town tonight or what happened to your father happens to you. And this time, we won't make it look like sickness. The threat hung in the air between them, confirmation of everything Eliza had suspected, everything she'd been too afraid to fully acknowledge. Her father hadn't died of consumption. He'd been murdered. And she was next. Well, Caleb said calmly, folding the note and adding it to the first one. That's interesting. Interesting? Eliza heard her voice rising, hysteria lurking at the edges. They just threatened to kill me the same way they killed my father, and you think it's interesting? I think it's sloppy. I think Vernon Pike is feeling pressured enough to make mistakes. He's used to people folding at the first sign of resistance. Your continued defiance is throwing him off balance. Caleb met her eyes steadily. And that makes him predictable. Desperate men follow patterns. We just have to anticipate his next move and be ready for it. His next move is murdering me. Then we make sure you're not an easy target. We also make sure that if something happens to you, it costs him everything. How? Caleb thought for a moment, then moved to the counter where he'd left his earlier sketch. He added quick notes, drawing lines connecting different elements. Pike's power rests on 3 pillars: financial control through the bank, legal control through the sheriff, and social control through fear. We can't topple all 3 at once, but we can destabilize them, make him fight on multiple fronts. With what army? With the people who came here this morning, with everyone your father ever helped, with anyone in this town who's sick of living under Vernon Pike's thumb. He looked up from the paper. You asked why I'm willing to fight this fight. Turn it around. Why are you? What are you really fighting for here? Eliza opened her mouth to say something about the mercantile, about her father's legacy, about not letting Vernon Pike win. But those answers felt hollow, insufficient. She closed her eyes, searching for deeper truth. When I was 10, she said slowly, my father took me to Denver. We stayed in a hotel, nothing fancy, but to me it seemed like a palace. And one morning at breakfast, I saw a woman at another table. She was dressed beautifully, spoke confidently, conducted business with men who treated her as an equal. I asked my father who she was, and he said she was a property owner, an investor, someone who'd built her own empire through intelligence and hard work. She opened her eyes, meeting Caleb's steady gaze. I asked if I could be like her someday, and my father said, you can be anything you're brave enough to become. That night, Vernon Pike tried to buy our store for the first time. Offered my father triple what it was worth, and my father said no because he'd promised me I could have something of my own, could build something that mattered. that I wouldn't have to depend on any man's favor to survive. Her voice caught, but she pushed through. Pike's been trying to take this away from me my entire adult life. If I surrender now, if I let him win, I'm proving that his money and power matter more than everything my father believed. I'm proving that women can't stand on their own, that we're just property to be claimed by whoever has the biggest wallet and the most intimidating threats. And I won't let that be true. Not for me, and not for every other woman who's watching to see if resistance is even possible. Silence settled over the mercantile, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock and the distant sounds of the street. Caleb studied her with those winter-gray eyes, and whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy something. "All right then," he said simply. "Let's get to work." They spent the rest of the afternoon planning. Caleb's approach was methodical, almost military in its precision. He made lists of Pike's known associates, mapped out properties and business interests, identified potential witnesses and allies. He questioned Eliza about every detail she knew: her father's illness, the bank's foreclosure procedures, Vernon's routine and habits. "We need leverage," he explained, sketching connections on the growing diagram. "Something Pike values more than his pride. Something he'll trade your freedom for. He has everything he wants except me. Everyone has secrets. Everyone has vulnerabilities. Your father discovered something about Pike. That's why he was killed. We need to figure out what that something was." Eliza thought back, trying to remember conversations, fragments of worry her father had expressed in those final weeks. He was going through old land records, said something about boundaries not matching, about surveys that seemed deliberately falsified. He thought Pike had been systematically stealing land from small homesteaders, using legal trickery to expand his ranch. That's a start. Federal crime if he's defrauding land claims. Where would those records be? County courthouse, probably, but the clerk there is Pike's cousin. Of course he is. Caleb didn't sound surprised. "What about your father's papers? Would he have kept copies?" Eliza's heart jumped. "The cellar. He had a storage trunk down there, full of old documents and correspondence. I haven't gone through it since he died. Couldn't face it." They descended into the mercantile's cellar, a cool space that smelled of earth and stored goods. In the corner, beneath a dusty tarp, sat her father's trunk. Eliza knelt before it, hands trembling as she worked the lock. Inside lay the collected fragments of Thomas Hartwell's life: letters, receipts, ledgers, personal journals. And beneath it all, wrapped in oilcloth, a leather folder tied with string. "What's this?" Caleb asked as Eliza lifted it free. "I don't know. I've never seen it before." She untied the string with careful fingers. Inside were documents: land surveys, claim records, correspondence between Vernon Pike and various county officials. But what caught her attention was a ledger page, filled with her father's precise handwriting, documenting what appeared to be systematic fraud. Pike land claim expansion, 1874 to 1878, her father had written. 15 homesteads purchased for fraction of value after mysterious circumstances forced sales. Patterns suggest coordination between bank, land office, and local law enforcement. Families relocated or disappeared. Property boundaries redrawn post-purchase to consolidate holdings. "This is it," Caleb breathed, reading over her shoulder. "This is what got your father killed." Eliza's hands shook as she continued through the documents. Her father had been building a case, carefully, methodically, documenting every suspicious transaction, every falsified survey, every family that had been driven off land that later became part of Vernon Pike's empire. "Why didn't he go to the authorities?" she whispered. Maybe he tried. Or maybe he knew the local authorities were compromised and was waiting to compile enough evidence to take to federal marshals. Caleb lifted one of the survey maps, studying it in the dim light. "This is dynamite, Eliza. This proves Pike's been committing land fraud on a massive scale. It's enough to bring down his entire operation. It's also enough to get us killed. If Pike murdered my father for discovering this, what do you think he'll do when he finds out we have it? Nothing, if we play this right. This isn't just leverage, this is insurance." Caleb carefully gathered the documents. "We make copies. We hide the originals somewhere safe. And we let Vernon Pike know that if anything happens to you, to me, to anyone who's helped you, These documents go straight to federal authorities. Hope flickered in Eliza's chest, fragile but growing. You think he'll back off? I think he'll have to. Men like Pike survive by staying in the shadows, by making sure their crimes look legal. Exposure would destroy everything he's built. He might control this town, but he doesn't control the federal government. They worked late into the evening, carefully copying documents by lamplight. Caleb's handwriting was surprisingly neat, his attention to detail meticulous. As they worked, Eliza found herself studying him, this stranger who had become her unlikely ally, who moved through her world with competent certainty. "Can I ask you something?" she said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Ask away." Before Juniper Bend, before the widow and her son, what made you become a bounty hunter? Most men don't choose that life without reason. Caleb's hand paused over the page he was copying, his scarred face unreadable in the lamplight. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I was 17 when the war ended. Went home to Tennessee to find my family's farm burned, my parents dead, my sister vanished. Spent 2 years tracking the men responsible. Found 3 of them, killed 2. The third got away." His voice carried no emotion, stating facts like reading from a ledger. "After that, bounty hunting seemed like natural progression. Already knew how to track men, already knew how to kill when necessary, and the law would pay me to do both legally. Seemed like a good arrangement." "Did you ever find him, the third man?" "No, lost his trail somewhere in New Mexico. Been chasing ghosts ever since, I suppose. Other people's ghosts when I can't find my own." Eliza reached across the table, covering his scarred hand with her own. He didn't pull away, but he didn't respond either, just let her touch rest there like a question neither of them knew how to answer. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "for your family, for everything you've lost. We've all lost something. You lost your father. I lost my family. Vernon Pike's victims lost their land, their livelihoods, their lives. Loss is the price of living in a world where powerful men take what they want and nobody stops them. But you're trying to stop him now. Stop Vernon." "Trying, yes. Succeeding?" He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers briefly with hers before withdrawing. "That remains to be seen. But at least this time I'm trying. That's more than I can say for Juniper Bend." They finished copying the documents as midnight approached. Caleb bundled the originals carefully, wrapping them in fresh oilcloth. "We need to hide these somewhere Pike would never think to look. Somewhere that if we both end up dead, someone else will find them and know what to do." Eliza thought for a moment. "Mrs. Chen, the boarding house. She has a safe where guests store valuables. She'd keep them secure, and if something happened to us, she'd have the sense to send them to federal authorities." "Good. I'll take them over tonight. You lock up here, don't answer the door for anyone, and keep your father's rifle close." "Where will you be?" "Making sure nobody tries to finish what that rock through the window started. I'll be on the roof across the street. Good vantage point, clear sight lines to your doors and windows." Fear clutched at Eliza's chest. "You think they'll come tonight?" Pike's feeling pressured. Desperate men make rash moves. Better to be ready and wrong than unprepared and dead. Caleb checked his revolver with practiced efficiency. "You know how to use that rifle?" "My father taught me." "Good. You see anyone approach this building who doesn't belong, you don't hesitate. You shoot first and we'll sort out explanations later. Understood?" Eliza nodded, throat tight. This was really happening. Her quiet life running a mercantile had transformed into something from a dime novel. Midnight violence, hidden documents, rooftop vigilance. Part of her wanted to laugh at the absurdity. The rest just wanted to survive until morning. Caleb paused at the door, his gray eyes serious in the lamplight. "Eliza, what you're doing, standing up to Pike, refusing to be intimidated, it matters. Not just for you, but for every person in this town who's been afraid for too long. Whatever happens tonight, tomorrow, in the days after, you've already won something important." "What's that?" "Yourself. Your father would be proud." He slipped out into the darkness before she could respond, leaving her alone with those words echoing in the quiet mercantile. Eliza locked the door behind him, checked the windows, and retrieved her father's rifle from its place behind the counter. Then she climbed the stairs to her room, positioned herself by the window where she could watch the street, and waited. The night stretched long and tense. Every sound made her jump. Wind rattling shutters, dogs barking in distant alleys, the creak of settling wood. Across the street, she could just make out Caleb's silhouette on the rooftop, a darker shadow against dark sky, patient and still as stone. She must have dozed despite her best intentions, because she jerked awake to the sound of breaking wood downstairs. Her heart hammered as she gripped the rifle, creeping toward the stairs. Below, she could hear voices, low, cautious, trying for stealth. Check the back room. She might be hiding supplies somewhere. Pike said the documents were in a trunk, probably the cellar. They were searching for her father's evidence. Eliza's mouth went dry. If they found the empty trunk, if they realized the documents were gone, they'd know she and Caleb were planning something. They'd escalate, and people would die. She raised the rifle, steadying her breathing the way her father had taught her, aimed at the ceiling above where she heard movement, and fired. The shot exploded through the quiet building, deafeningly loud. Below, men shouted in alarm. Boots pounded toward the door. Eliza fired again, deliberately high, giving them incentive to run rather than fight. "She's armed! Get out!" They crashed through the front door, 3 figures in dark clothing fleeing into the night. Across the street, Caleb was already moving, vaulting from the rooftop with reckless speed. Eliza heard shouts, the sounds of struggle, then 2 more gunshots that made her heart stop. Silence fell. She stood frozen at the top of the stairs, rifle clutched in white-knuckled hands, waiting for what? More attackers? Caleb's voice? Proof that she'd just made everything infinitely worse? The mercantile door opened slowly. "Eliza? It's me. Don't shoot." Relief flooded through her so intensely she nearly dropped the rifle. Caleb appeared at the base of the stairs, breathing hard, but apparently uninjured. Behind him, she could see one of the intruders on the floor, groaning and clutching his leg. "The others got away," Caleb reported, "but this one wasn't quite fast enough. Meet Jacob Pierce, one of Vernon Pike's ranch hands. Seems eager to tell us all about who sent him and why." Jacob looked up with wild eyes, his face pale in the lamplight. Blood seeped between his fingers where Caleb's bullet had found his thigh. Painful, but not fatal. "I ain't telling you nothing," Jacob spat. "Mr. Pike's gonna kill you both anyway. Might as well keep my mouth shut and die quick." Caleb knelt beside him, his voice deadly calm. "You're right about one thing. Vernon Pike is very good at killing people. Killed Thomas Hartwell. Probably killed a dozen homesteaders before him. But here's what you're missing, Jacob. I'm better." He pulled out the copied documents, holding them where Jacob could see. "See these? Evidence of every crime Vernon Pike has committed in the last 5 years. Land fraud, murder, conspiracy. Enough to hang him 10 times over. And tomorrow morning, copies go to federal marshals, territorial governor, every authority Pike doesn't own. His empire ends. The only question is whether you go down with him or save yourself." Jacob's eyes widened, flicking between Caleb's cold face and the damning papers. "He'll kill me if I talk. He'll hang if you don't. And the men who help him burn will burn right alongside him. Your choice, Jacob, but choose fast. That leg wound needs treating, and I'm not inclined to help enemies." Eliza descended the stairs slowly, rifle still ready, watching this dangerous dance between predator and prey. Jacob's resolve was crumbling. She could see it in the way his eyes kept returning to the documents, in the tremor in his voice. "What do you want to know?" And in that moment, watching a grown man break under the weight of his own crimes, Eliza understood that the war had truly begun. Vernon Pike had made his move, and they'd survived. More than survived. They'd captured a soldier and seized territory. The balance of power had shifted, just slightly but unmistakably. Tomorrow would bring consequences. But tonight, for the first time since her father's death, Eliza felt something other than fear and grief. She felt dangerous. Jacob Pierce talked for the better part of an hour, his voice growing weaker as blood loss and fear took their toll. Caleb had bound the leg wound tight enough to slow the bleeding, but not so tight as to offer comfort. A calculated reminder that cooperation bought mercy. Eliza listened from her position on the stairs, the rifle still cradled in her arms, as Jacob laid bare the machinery of Vernon Pike's corruption. The story he told was worse than she'd imagined. Her father's death hadn't been poison after all. It had been arsenic mixed into the tonic Dr. Brennan prescribed for his cough, administered in doses small enough to mimic wasting illness. 3 months of slow murder while the whole town watched Thomas Hartwell fade, none of them knowing they were witnessing an execution. Brennan knew? Eliza's voice came out strangled, barely recognizing the sound as her own. Jacob nodded miserably. He's the one who suggested it, said it would look natural, that nobody would question consumption. Pike paid him $500 and promised to look the other way when Brennan's gambling debts came due. And the others? The homesteaders my father documented? Some left on their own after their wells got poisoned or their livestock started dying mysterious-like. The ones who wouldn't leave... Jacob swallowed hard. There's a canyon about 20 miles north of town. Deep ravine, rocky bottom. Bodies don't stay whole long down there, between the fall and the scavengers. Pike's men would stage accidents, horse through a rider, wagon lost a wheel on a narrow trail, hunting mishap. Sheriff Garrett would write it up official, and that'd be the end of it. Caleb's expression remained carefully neutral, but Eliza saw his hands tighten where they rested on his knees. How many? I don't know exactly. I only been working for Pike 3 years, but I heard the older hands talk. Maybe a dozen, maybe more. The number hung in the air like smoke, like the ghosts of murdered men and women demanding acknowledgement. A dozen people. Families destroyed, lives erased. Also, Vernon Pike could expand his empire by a few thousand acres. Also, he could be the biggest, richest, most powerful man in the territory. You participated in any of these accidents? Caleb asked quietly. Jacob's silence was answer enough. Which ones? The Morrison family. 18 months back. They had a claim that bordered Pike's north pasture. Good water source, prime grazing. Pike offered to buy. They refused. 2 weeks later, their house burned. They barely got out alive, lost everything. Had to sell the land for pennies just to afford passage back east. You set the fire. It wasn't a question. Jacob looked away, shame and defiance warring on his face. I was following orders. Pike pays well, and a man's got to make a living. A man's got to live with himself, too. Caleb stood, towering over the wounded ranch hand. Here's what happens next, Jacob. You're going to write down everything you just told us. Every crime, every name, every detail you can remember. You're going to sign it and swear to its truth. And then you're going to disappear before Vernon Pike figures out you failed tonight. He'll find me. He always finds people who cross him. Not if you're smart. There's a stagecoach leaving for Denver at dawn. You'll be on it with enough money to start over somewhere. Pike's reach doesn't extend. But if you stay here, if you warn him about what we know, I promise you'll regret it more than anything you've ever done in your miserable life. Jacob looked between Caleb's cold face and Eliza's unforgiving stare, calculating his odds. Whatever he saw there convinced him. I'll need paper. And someone's got to help me to the stage depot. This leg won't carry me far. Write first. We'll discuss transportation after. While Jacob laboriously composed his confession, Eliza pulled Caleb aside, her voice low and urgent. We can't let him just leave. He admitted to arson, to being part of murder conspiracies. He should face justice. He will. But right now we need his testimony more than we need his punishment. He goes to trial here, Vernon Pike controls the jury, the judge, the whole proceedings. Jacob walks free and we lose a witness. He runs to Denver, we've got his written confession, and he's out of Pike's reach. Sometimes you have to choose between revenge and results. Eliza wanted to argue, wanted to insist that justice meant more than pragmatic compromise. But she'd seen too much of how Redwood Crossing's version of justice worked. Maybe Caleb was right. Maybe getting Pike was worth letting a smaller fish swim free. How do we know he won't just destroy his confession the moment he's out of sight? Because I'm going to personally escort him to the stage and watch until it leaves. And because I'm going to make it very clear that if Vernon Pike gets wind of our evidence before we're ready, Jacob Pierce will be the first name I give to federal marshals. Man's a coward at heart. He'll choose self-preservation over loyalty every time. By the time Jacob finished writing, dawn was painting the eastern sky pale gray. His statement filled 3 pages in cramped, barely legible handwriting, but it covered everything. The arsenic in Thomas Hartwell's medicine, the staged accidents, the systematic intimidation and violence. At the bottom, Jacob signed his name with a shaking hand. Caleb read it through twice, then folded it carefully and added it to the growing collection of evidence. Good enough. Now let's get you cleaned up and on that stage before Pike's men come looking. They half-carried Jacob through the pre-dawn streets, keeping to alleys and shadows. The town was just beginning to stir. Shopkeepers opening shutters, ranch hands heading for early shifts, the normal rhythms of a community that had no idea how much had changed in a single night. Eliza felt disconnected from it all, like she was watching from a great distance. These people still lived in Vernon Pike's world. She'd stepped outside it into something far more dangerous and far more real. At the stage depot, Caleb paid Jacob's fare and pressed $20 into his hand. Denver's big enough to disappear in if you're smart. Get yourself a new name, new work, new life. And Jacob? Stay disappeared, because if I see you again, if Pike's lawyers somehow produce you as a witness claiming we forced that confession, I won't be inclined toward mercy a second time. Jacob nodded frantically, hobbling toward the waiting coach. They watched until it pulled away, dust rising in its wake, carrying their star witness toward safety and anonymity. You think he'll keep quiet? Eliza asked as they walked back toward the mercantile. For a while at least, long enough for us to make our move. Caleb's gray eyes scanned the street, cataloging early morning activity with professional thoroughness. Pike will know something went wrong. 3 men sent on a simple retrieval mission, only 2 come back, and those 2 probably scared enough to tell him you were armed and waiting. He's going to escalate. What's left to escalate to? He's already threatened everyone who helped me, tried to steal evidence, sent men to ransack my store. What else can he do? Caleb stopped walking, turning to face her with an expression that made her stomach drop. He can stop pretending to be civilized, stop hiding behind lawyers and sheriffs and proper procedure. Men like Pike, when you back them into corners, they show you who they really are, and it's never pretty. As if summoned by Caleb's words, Sheriff Garrett appeared at the end of the street, flanked by 2 deputies Eliza recognized as Pike ranch hands wearing borrowed badges. They moved with purpose, heading straight for the mercantile. Here we go, Caleb murmured. Remember, you're the wronged party here. They broke into your store, you defended yourself. Don't volunteer information, don't let them bully you into admissions. Garrett reached them, his weathered face set in hard lines. Miss Hartwell, Mr. Rourke, need you both to come with me to the jail. Got questions about the shooting last night. What shooting? Eliza kept her voice steady, channeling her father's stubborn calm. I fired warning shots at intruders breaking into my property. That's my right under territorial law. So you admit to firing a weapon within town limits. I admit to defending my home and business from criminals, which is more than you seem willing to do, Sheriff. Garrett's jaw tightened. One of those supposed criminals turned up at Doc Brennan's this morning with a bullet in his leg. Says you and this stranger ambushed him and his friends, shot him without provocation. Interesting story. Caleb's tone suggested he found it anything but. Which criminal told you this? I'd like to hear him repeat those claims under oath. That's not your concern. What concerns me is discharge of firearms, assault with a deadly weapon, and possible conspiracy to commit murder. Murder? Eliza felt cold fury rising in her chest. Someone breaks into my store in the middle of the night, and when I defend myself, you want to charge me with murder? I want to charge you with whatever Mr. Pike's lawyers tell me to charge you with. Garrett said it flatly, without pretense or shame. Now you can come peaceful-like, or we can do this the hard way. Your choice. Caleb's hand drifted toward his revolver, the movement so casual it almost seemed accidental. And if we choose a third option, if we decline your invitation and suggest you come back with an actual warrant signed by an actual judge, then I arrest you for resisting a peace officer in performance of his duties, and things get a whole lot more complicated for everyone involved. They stood in the empty street, tension crackling like electricity before a storm. Eliza could see people watching from windows now, curious and frightened faces pressed against glass. This was the moment, she realized. The point where she could back down, apologize, try to make peace with Vernon Pike's world, or she could stand firm and accept whatever consequences followed. She thought of her father, wasting away while poison worked through his system, of the Morrison family fleeing their burning home, of a dozen bodies in a canyon ravine, their deaths written off as accidents by the very man now threatening her with arrest. I'll come with you, Sheriff, but I want it on record that this is false arrest, harassment, and abuse of power. And I want everyone watching to know that Vernon Pike is using the law as a weapon because he can't intimidate me any other way. She said it loud enough to carry, her voice ringing clear across the street. Heads appeared in doorways, more faces at windows. Let them see, she thought. Let them witness what defiance looked like, what it cost. Garrett's face flushed dark. You're making a mistake, girl. No, Sheriff, the mistake is yours. Mine is just choosing when and how to stand up for what's right. Today seems as good a day as any. The jail occupied a squat stone building at the edge of town, designed more for intimidation than security. Garrett locked Eliza in one cell and Caleb in another across the narrow corridor, then dismissed his deputies and settled himself behind his desk with obvious discomfort. For what it's worth, he said after a long silence, I'm sorry about this. About all of it. Your father was a good man. Good enough that you watched him die and did nothing. Eliza gripped the cell bars, anger making her reckless. How much did Vernon pay you to look the other way while he murdered my father, Sheriff? What's the going rate for a man's life in Redwood Crossing? Garrett flinched like she'd struck him. I didn't know. Not about the arsenic, not about any of it. Thomas was sick, and I believed what Doc Brennan said about consumption. But you suspected. Deep down, you knew something was wrong. And you chose not to look too close because looking meant losing Pike's patronage. You don't understand the position I'm in. I understand perfectly. Caleb's voice cut through Garrett's excuses like a knife. You're a coward who sold his integrity for comfort and security. You tell yourself you're keeping the peace, maintaining order, doing what's necessary. But what you really are is an accomplice to murder. And when this all comes crashing down, and it will come down, Sheriff, you'll hang right alongside Vernon Pike unless you make better choices starting now. Garrett stood abruptly, his chair scraping loud against the wooden floor. I've taken about all I'm going to take from you, Drifter. You're in my jail, and you do well to remember that you're a pathetic old man who let evil flourish because standing against it required courage you don't possess? Caleb's gray eyes were merciless. I remember just fine. Question is, what are you going to remember when federal marshals arrive asking why you arrested the victims instead of the criminals? When they want to know why a woman defending her property from armed intruders gets locked up while the men who broke into her store walk free? There won't be any federal marshals. Vernon owns this territory. He doesn't own me. Eliza felt the truth of it settle into her bones, solid and unshakable. He doesn't own the people who helped me yesterday. He doesn't own the evidence we've gathered or the witnesses ready to testify. He just owns you, Sheriff, and that's not nearly enough anymore. Before Garrett could respond, the jail door opened. Vernon Pike stepped inside, removing his hat with theatrical courtesy, his cold blue eyes taking in the scene with satisfaction. Sheriff Garrett, I understand you've apprehended the criminals who attacked my ranch hand last night. Excellent work. Mr. Pike. Garrett's voice carried a note of relief, like a drowning man glimpsing rescue. Just doing my job. Got them both secured, waiting on the circuit judge to arrive next week. A week in jail might give them time to reconsider their unfortunate choices. Vernon approached Eliza's cell, studying her with the calculating interest of a man examining livestock. Miss Hartwell, you're looking tired. Perhaps you're beginning to understand the futility of your position. I understand that you're a murderer who poisons sick men and burns families out of their homes. I understand that your entire empire is built on fraud and violence. And I understand that no matter how long you keep me locked up, the truth doesn't change. Something flickered in Vernon's expression. Surprise, maybe, that she'd speak so directly. Then his smile returned, colder now, showing teeth. Bold words from a woman in a cage. But words are cheap, aren't they? Results are what matter. And the result here is clear. You're in jail. Your store will be foreclosed on by week's end. Your supporters are facing consequences for their poor judgment. And you have no options left except the one I've been offering since the beginning. Which is? Marry me. The words dropped into the cell like stones into still water. Eliza stared at him, certain she'd misheard. What? You heard correctly. Marry me and all of this ends. The foreclosure stops, the charges disappear, your friend's debts become manageable again. You get to keep your precious mercantile, maintain your independence such as it is. All you have to do is accept my proposal and stop this pointless resistance. You murdered my father. Your father was ill. He died. These things happen. Vernon's tone suggested he was discussing weather, not murder. But his death doesn't have to be meaningless. You could honor his memory by choosing wisely, by ensuring his life's work continues through a profitable partnership. Think about it, Eliza. You'd be the wealthiest woman in the territory. You'd want for nothing. Except freedom. Except dignity. Except the ability to look at myself in the mirror without seeing a coward who surrendered everything that mattered. Vernon's mask slipped, showing the cold fury beneath. You think you have choices here? You think this defiance makes you strong? You're a merchant's daughter playing at rebellion, and you're going to lose. The only question is how much you lose and how many people you drag down with you. At least I'll lose on my feet instead of winning on my knees. Poetic. Pointless, but poetic. Vernon turned to Garrett. Keep her here until she develops some sense. No visitors, no communication with the outside. Let her sit in the quiet and think about her situation. And me? Caleb's voice carried across the corridor, calm and cold. What's my role in this romantic arrangement? Vernon regarded him with the kind of contempt reserved for insects. You're a drifter who made the mistake of interfering in matters beyond your understanding. Once the circuit judge arrives, you'll be tried for assault, probably convicted, definitely hanged. Redwood Crossing has no tolerance for troublemakers. Neither does the federal government, but they're particularly intolerant of land fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and systematic corruption of territorial law. Funny how that works. More empty threats from a man with no power, no position, no future. Sheriff, make sure he understands his situation, whatever methods you deem appropriate. Vernon left, his expensive boots echoing on the stone floor. The moment the door closed behind him, Garrett sagged, all his borrowed authority draining away. I can't, he whispered. Can't let him hang you for doing what's right. Can't keep Miss Eliza locked up when all she did was defend herself. But if I let you go, Vernon will destroy me, my family, everything. Then help us destroy him first. Caleb moved to the front of his cell, his intense gaze fixed on the broken sheriff. You know what he is. You've known for years. The only question is whether you're going to spend the rest of your life being his weapon, or whether you're going to find whatever courage you once had and use it before it's too late. Garrett looked at him, looked at Eliza, looked at his own hands like they belonged to a stranger. Even if I wanted to help, what could I do? He owns the bank, the land office, half the businesses in town. He owns me. He only owns you if you let him. Eliza pressed against the bars, willing him to understand. My father gathered evidence. We have documents proving Pike's crimes going back years. We have witnesses willing to testify. We have everything we need to bring him down. We just need someone with legal authority willing to act on it. Someone like the sheriff of Redwood Crossing. He'd kill me. He's killing you anyway. Caleb's voice was gentle now, understanding. Every day you serve him, every compromise you make, every injustice you witness and ignore, it's all killing the man you used to be. At some point, you have to decide whether you want to die on your feet or live on your knees. And Sheriff, living on your knees isn't really living at all. The silence stretched long and heavy. Outside, they could hear the town continuing its daily business, unaware that inside this stone building, a man was fighting a war with his own conscience. Garrett moved to his desk, opened a drawer, pulled out a bottle of whiskey. He didn't drink, just stared at it like it held answers. Your father came to me, he said finally, 2 weeks before he died, showed me some of what he'd found, the land records, the pattern of suspicious deaths, asked me to investigate Pike officially, to request federal assistance. And I told him he was chasing shadows, that he needed to let old grievances go and focus on his health. Eliza's throat tightened. You sent him away. I sent him to his death, because I knew if Thomas kept digging, if he kept asking questions, Vernon would eliminate him. And I told myself that one man's life wasn't worth the chaos that would come from challenging Pike's power, that maintaining order meant accepting some injustice. Garrett finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. I was wrong. I've been wrong about so many things for so long that I don't even know who I am anymore. You're a man who still has a chance to make different choices." Caleb's tone held no judgment, only truth. "It's not too late, Sheriff. Help us. Stand with us. Be the lawman this town needs instead of the one Vernon Pike bought." Garrett stood slowly, moving to the cell that held Eliza. He pulled the keys from his belt, fingers trembling as he fit one into the lock. "If I do this, if I help you, there's no going back. Pike will come after me with everything he has. My family will be safer with Pike in custody than with him running loose and angry." Eliza stepped out of the cell as the door swung open, hardly daring to believe this was happening. Once he's arrested, once federal authorities are involved, he can't retaliate without making things worse for himself. But you have to act now, Sheriff, before he consolidates his position, before he eliminates more threats. Garrett moved to Caleb's cell next, unlocking it with the same trembling hands. "What do you need from me?" "A statement. Your testimony about what you know, what you've witnessed, what you've been ordered to ignore. Then a formal complaint to federal marshals requesting investigation into corruption of territorial officials and violations of federal land law. Can you do that?" "I can try, but Vernon has eyes everywhere. The moment I send that complaint, he'll know. He'll move against all of us. Let him try." Caleb stepped from the cell, rolling his shoulders to ease the tension of confinement. "We've got evidence, we've got witnesses, and now we've got the law on our side. Pike can't fight on all fronts at once. Something's going to break, and when it does, we need to be ready to exploit it." They moved quickly after that, time suddenly precious. Garrett wrote his statement at the desk, his handwriting growing steadier as words poured out. Years of witnessed crimes, ignored reports, ordered cover-ups. By the time he finished, dawn had given way to full morning, and Redwood Crossing was awake and bustling. "The telegraph office," Garrett said, signing his name at the bottom of the final page. "I'll send the complaint to the territorial marshal in Denver. Should reach them by this afternoon." "Do it personally," Caleb advised. "Don't trust it to a clerk who might be in Pike's pocket. Send it yourself and wait for confirmation." They left through the jail's back entrance, avoiding the main street where curious eyes might note their early release. Eliza felt exposed, vulnerable, like walking through a world that had subtly shifted while she was locked away. Every face seemed suspicious, every shadow a potential threat. At the telegraph office, Garrett sent his message with shaking hands while Caleb and Eliza kept watch at the windows. The response came back within minutes, terse and official but unmistakable. Federal marshals would arrive within 3 days to investigate allegations of corruption and land fraud in Redwood Crossing. 3 days. 72 hours to survive before help arrived. 72 hours for Vernon Pike to realize his empire was crumbling and make his final desperate moves. "We need to warn everyone who helped you," Caleb said as they hurried back toward the mercantile. "Get them somewhere safe, somewhere Pike can't reach them before the marshals arrive." "Where? He controls everything in town, and most people don't have the means to just leave." "The canyon where Pike's men dumped bodies. You said it's 20 miles north?" Eliza nodded, not understanding where he was going. "There's a settlement beyond it, mining camp called Silver Creek. Rough place, but outside Pike's territory. We gather everyone at your store tonight, load wagons, and move the whole group north before Pike knows what's happening. By the time he figures out where we've gone, the marshals will be here." "That's insane. You're talking about evacuating half the town's merchants and shopkeepers to a mining camp in the middle of nowhere." "You have a better idea?" She didn't, and the certainty in Caleb's gray eyes, the absolute conviction that this could work, made her want to believe. "How do we get word to everyone without alerting Pike's men?" Carefully and quickly. Caleb was already moving, his mind clearly racing through logistics and timelines. "You trust Mrs. Chen?" "With my life." "Then we start there. Have her spread the word. Quiet, personal visits to each person who helped you. Meeting tonight after dark at the mercantile. Pack light. Bring only what can't be replaced. We leave at midnight." They spent the day in furious preparation. Mrs. Chen proved invaluable, moving through town with the unassuming efficiency of someone everyone trusted and no one suspected. One by one, the messages went out to merchants and shopkeepers, to families who'd contributed to Eliza's cause. to anyone who'd shown even a hint of defiance toward Vernon Pike's rule. Meanwhile, Caleb and Eliza gathered supplies, food, water, blankets, medical supplies. Everything they'd need to get 20-plus people through a night journey across rough territory. The mercantile's back room became a staging area, crates and bundles organized with military precision. "You've done this before," Eliza observed, watching Caleb work. "Organized escapes, moved people in secret. During the war, helped refugees slip through Confederate lines, get them to Union territory. Different circumstances, same basic principles. Move fast, stay quiet, trust only people you're certain of. And if Pike discovers what we're planning before we leave," Caleb checked his revolver, the gesture automatic and telling. "Then we fight. But let's try very hard not to let it come to that." As darkness fell, people began arriving at the mercantile's back entrance. Marcus Webb came first, his wife and 2 children in tow, their faces pale but determined. Then Samuel Hayes, Margaret Sullivan, Jack Morrison and his family. The same Morrisons whose house had burned 18 months ago, who'd stayed in Redwood Crossing despite having every reason to leave. Seeing them now, choosing again to stand against Pike despite past trauma, made Eliza's throat tight with emotion. By 11 o'clock, 23 people crowded into the mercantile's back room. Men, women, children ranging from infants to grandparents. All of them had chosen resistance over submission. All of them were trusting Caleb and Eliza to lead them to safety. "We leave in 1 hour," Caleb announced, his voice low but carrying. "Wagons are loaded, route is planned. We'll travel dark and quiet. No talking, no lights unless absolutely necessary. 20 miles to Silver Creek, should arrive before dawn if we keep good pace. Questions?" "What about Pike?" Marcus Webb asked what everyone was thinking. "When he discovers we're gone, he'll be furious, but he'll also be 3 days away from federal investigation. My guess is he'll be too busy protecting himself to worry about chasing refugees. And if I'm wrong, if he does come after us, we'll be ready." The plan was solid, the timing was good, everything should have worked. But at 11:30, as they were making final preparations to leave, the mercantile's front door exploded inward in a shower of splintered wood and breaking glass. Armed men poured through the opening, 6, 7, 8 of them, all carrying rifles, all wearing the hard faces of men paid to hurt people. Leading them was Vernon Pike, his gentleman's mask finally abandoned, showing only rage and murderous intent. "Going somewhere, Miss Hartwell?" The moment stretched impossibly thin, balanced on the edge of violence. Vernon Pike stood framed in the shattered doorway, lamplight catching on the revolver in his hand and the cold fury in his eyes. Behind him, his men fanned out with practiced efficiency. Rifles leveled at the crowd of terrified families huddled in the mercantile's back room. Children whimpered against their mothers' skirts. Men who'd chosen courage hours ago now faced the reality of what that choice cost. Eliza felt Caleb shift beside her, his hand hovering near his weapon, calculating odds that couldn't possibly work in their favor. 8 armed men against 1 gunslinger and a room full of civilians. The arithmetic was brutal and clear. "I asked you a question." Vernon's voice cut through the silence like breaking glass. "Going somewhere in the middle of the night with half the town's merchants? That seems remarkably suspicious, wouldn't you say, Sheriff?" Tom Garrett stepped from behind Eliza, his face ashen but his jaw set. The transformation that had begun in the jail was complete now. Whatever man he'd been before, whatever compromises he'd made with conscience, they were gone. What remained was someone who'd finally chosen a side and meant to stand there regardless of cost. "It's suspicious that you broke into private property with armed men, Vernon. That's trespassing at minimum. Assault with deadly weapons if you actually fire those rifles. And judging by the look on your face, probably murder if we give you half a chance." Vernon's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Bold words from a man who's been in my pocket for 5 years. What happened, Tom? Suddenly grow a spine at the worst possible moment? Suddenly remembered what it felt like to look at myself in the mirror and not hate what I saw." Garrett's hand rested on his own weapon, though he made no move to draw. "You're finished, Vernon. Federal marshals are already on their way. They know about the land fraud, the murders, all of it. Best thing you can do now is put down that gun and come peaceful." "Federal marshals." Vernon spoke the words like they were something distasteful. "Based on what evidence?" The wild accusations of a dead man's daughter and a drifter with no credibility? You really think anyone's going to believe? They'll believe Jacob Pierce's signed confession. Caleb's voice was steady, conversational. They'll believe Sheriff Garrett's official complaint detailing years of witnessed corruption. They'll believe the land records Thomas Hartwell compiled showing systematic fraud. And they'll especially believe the testimony of 23 citizens willing to swear under oath that you've been terrorizing this town through violence and intimidation. Vernon's face went carefully blank, but Eliza saw his fingers tighten on the revolver. Jacob Pierce is a liar and a drunk. His word means nothing. Maybe, but combined with everything else, it paints a pretty damning picture, one that federal authorities will be very interested in investigating. Caleb took a small step forward, positioning himself between Vernon's men and the families behind him. You've lost, Pike. Your empire's crumbling. Only question now is how much blood you want to spill on your way down. I haven't lost anything. But there was an edge to Vernon's voice now, desperation bleeding through the rage. You think federal marshals scare me? You think I don't have friends in Denver, in the territorial government? I've been building influence while you were playing at Rebellion. I can make this disappear. I can make all of you disappear. Then why are you here? Eliza heard herself ask, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. If you're so confident, so untouchable, why break into my store with armed thugs in the middle of the night? Why not just wait for your powerful friends to make us go away? The question landed like a blow. Vernon's mask slipped further, showing something raw and wounded beneath the calculated menace. Because you humiliated me. Because you stood in the street and called me a man who threatens women, and you made people believe it. Because every day you keep defying me, you make me look weak, and I will not be weak. Then you should have chosen strength over cruelty. Eliza felt years of fear and grief crystallizing into something harder, something unbreakable. Real strength doesn't need to crush people to prove itself. It doesn't poison sick men or burn families from their homes. It doesn't buy laws and lawmen and pretend that makes you legitimate. You're not strong, Vernon. You're just a frightened little man who confused money with worth. Vernon raised his revolver, aiming directly at her chest. Shut your mouth. Or what? You'll kill me the way you killed my father? In front of all these witnesses, with federal marshals already on their way? That seems uncharacteristically stupid, even for you. I said shut your mouth. Vernon's hand shook, his control fracturing. You don't know what you're talking about. Your father was sick. He died of natural causes. I had nothing to do with arsenic in his medicine. Eliza's voice rang clear and cold. Administered over 3 months by Dr. Brennan on your orders. Small doses to mimic wasting illness. We have Jacob Pierce's confession. We have Brennan's financial record showing the $500 you paid him. We have everything, Vernon. Every crime, every victim, every lie you told to cover it up. For a moment, she thought he would fire. Saw his finger tighten on the trigger. Saw murder in his eyes. Then Caleb moved, not drawing his weapon, just shifting his position so he stood directly in Vernon's line of fire. You shoot her. You have to shoot me first. And I'm faster than you, Pike. We both know it. You might get 1 shot off before I put 3 bullets in you. Is your pride really worth dying for? The standoff held, crackling with potential violence. Vernon's men shifted nervously, their rifles still trained but their confidence clearly shaken. They'd signed on to intimidate shopkeepers, not fight a gunslinger who looked death in the eye without flinching. Then a new voice cut through the tension, young, frightened, but carrying authority none of them expected. Mr. Pike, sir? There's something you should know. Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway behind Vernon was a boy of maybe 14, dressed in the simple clothes of a ranch hand. Eliza recognized him as one of the younger workers from Pike's spread, someone who ran errands and handled minor tasks. Not now, Billy, Vernon snapped without looking away from Caleb. But sir, it's important. It's about the canyon, the North Ravine where certain things got taken care of. Vernon's face went white. I said not now. Federal men are there. Billy's voice gained strength, like he'd passed some point of no return and decided to see it through. Showed up this afternoon with Sheriff Garrett's deputies. They're digging, found bones, lots of bones, and they're asking questions about whose land it's on and who had access and... You idiot! Vernon whirled on the boy, his revolver swinging wild. "Why didn't you tell me immediately?" "I tried, sir, but you were meeting with your lawyers, and then you said not to disturb you, and then you rode into town with the men and I followed and—" "Get out! Get out before I shoot you where you stand!" Billy fled into the darkness. Vernon stood breathing hard, his carefully constructed world visibly collapsing around him. The canyon. The mass grave he'd thought was secret, hidden on land he controlled where no one would ever think to look. Except Sheriff Garrett had thought to look, had probably sent deputies there the moment he turned against Pike, knowing exactly what they'd find. "It's over, Vernon." Garrett's voice was almost gentle. "They've found the bodies. They'll identify victims, match them to missing person reports. Every family you destroyed, every life you ended, it's all coming to light. Best thing you can do now is surrender peaceful and hope for mercy." "Mercy?" Vernon's laugh bordered on hysteria. "From who? From you? From her?" He gestured at Eliza with his revolver. "From federal authorities who'll hang me for crimes I committed to build something in this wasteland? There is no mercy for men like me. There's only winning or losing, and I do not lose." He turned his weapon back toward Eliza, but Caleb was already moving. The gunslinger's hand flashed to his holster with blinding speed, the Colt clearing leather and firing in one fluid motion. The shot caught Vernon in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his revolver clattering to the floor. Vernon's men froze, caught between training and self-preservation. Caleb had his weapon trained on them now, gray eyes hard as winter stone. "Drop the rifles, nice and slow, because I promise you, Vernon Pike doesn't pay well enough to die for." One by one, the rifles hit the floor. Men who'd terrorized Redwood Crossing for years suddenly looked like what they really were, hired thugs who'd bullied the weak because the strong never challenged them. Faced with someone who wouldn't break, wouldn't run, they crumbled. Vernon clutched his bleeding shoulder, his face twisted with pain and disbelief. "You shot me! You actually shot me!" "Seemed like the thing to do, considering you were about to murder an unarmed woman," Caleb gestured with his revolver. "On your knees, all of you, hands where we can see them." They obeyed, even Vernon, sinking to the floor amid broken glass and splintered wood. Sheriff Garrett moved to secure them, producing iron shackles from his belt and working with grim efficiency. The families in the back room began to emerge, shock giving way to cautious relief. "Is it really over?" Mrs. Chen asked, her voice trembling. "Is he finally finished?" "Almost." Eliza moved to stand over Vernon Pike, this man who'd cast such a long shadow over her life. Up close, bleeding and defeated, he looked smaller somehow, less monstrous, just a man who'd chosen cruelty and paid the price. There's still the trial, the sentencing, justice for everyone he hurt. But the power he had, the fear he inspired, that's done. Vernon looked up at her, and for just a moment she saw something human in his eyes, regret maybe, or the terrible understanding of consequences finally arriving. "Your father would have sold. If I just waited, been patient, he would have eventually come around. But I couldn't stand the thought of him saying no, of anyone saying no. That's the difference between you and decent people." Eliza's voice was steady, final. Decent people understand that no is a complete answer, that other people's choices matter, that power doesn't give you the right to take whatever you want. Pretty sentiment. Won't mean much when my lawyers get me out of this. Your lawyers can't help you anymore, Vernon, not against federal charges, not against the evidence we've compiled, not against the 23 witnesses in this room and the dozen bodies in that canyon. She turned away, done with him. "Sheriff Garrett, please remove this man from my store, and have someone board up that door before we freeze." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Garrett and several of the merchants hauled Vernon and his men to the jail, securing them in cells that had held Eliza just that morning. Dr. Brennan was arrested trying to flee town, his saddlebags stuffed with cash and incriminating documents he'd failed to destroy. The telegraph office sent urgent messages to Denver, updating federal marshals on the situation and requesting immediate assistance. By dawn, Redwood Crossing looked like a town waking from a long nightmare. People emerged from their homes cautiously at first, then with growing confidence as word spread that Vernon Pike was in custody. The fear that had permeated every interaction, every business dealing, Every casual conversation for years was lifting like morning fog. Eliza stood in her damaged mercantile, watching sunlight stream through the broken door, turning dust motes to gold. Caleb worked beside her, sweeping glass and wood splinters, his movements efficient and methodical. They'd been working in comfortable silence for nearly an hour when he finally spoke. "You staying?" The question caught her off guard. "Staying where?" "Here. Redwood Crossing. Now that Pike's gone, you could sell this place, move somewhere with less painful memories. Start fresh." Eliza considered it, really considered it. The mercantile held so much grief, so many reminders of her father's absence and the violence that had taken him. It would be easier to leave, to find some new town where she wasn't the woman who'd brought down Vernon Pike, where every face didn't carry memories of fear and compromise. But easier wasn't always better. "This is my home," she said finally. "My father built something here. Not just a business, but a community of people who believed in fairness and dignity, even when it was dangerous to believe. I'm not giving that up because some tyrant made it painful for a while. Even though everyone will know what happened, what Pike did, what your father discovered, how you fought back, that kind of attention can be uncomfortable. Let them know. Let them remember. Maybe next time someone tries to buy their silence or their compliance, they'll think about what it cost last time. Maybe they'll stand up sooner." She set down her broom, meeting Caleb's gray eyes steadily. "What about you? You staying?" He was quiet for a long moment, his scarred face unreadable in the morning light. "Wasn't planning to. Usually I deliver my bounties, collect my pay, and move on before complications set in." "Am I a complication?" "Eliza, you're the definition of complicated." But he said it gently, almost fondly. "You're stubborn and principled and brave in ways that scare me a little. You make me want to be the man I was before the war broke something in me. And that's terrifying because I don't know if that man still exists or if I'm just chasing another ghost I'll never catch." "Maybe you don't have to catch him. Maybe you just have to become something new." Eliza moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. "Someone who stays instead of running. Someone who builds instead of just tearing down what's broken." "I'm not good at staying." "You were good at standing between me and Vernon Pike, at organizing an escape for 23 people, at seeing what needed doing and doing it regardless of personal cost. Seems to me those are the skills Redwood Crossing needs now. Someone who knows how to stand up to bullies, who won't be intimidated or bought off." "You suggesting I become sheriff?" There was humor in his voice, but also genuine curiosity. "I'm suggesting you think about what you want instead of just reacting to what's in front of you. You told me you've been drifting for 5 years, carrying guilt over Juniper Bend. Well, you saved a whole town this time. Doesn't that buy you some peace? Some permission to stop running?" Caleb looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What are you really asking, Eliza?" "I'm asking if maybe you're tired of being alone, if maybe having someone to stand with sounds better than another 5 years of drifting from town to town, fighting other people's battles while ignoring your own. And if I stay? What then? We run the mercantile together, pretend we're not two broken people trying to make sense of a broken world? We don't have to pretend anything. We can just be honest about what we are. Survivors who chose to fight instead of surrender. People who discovered they're stronger together than apart." She reached out, her fingers brushing the scar on his face with tentative gentleness. "I'm not asking for promises or pretty words, Caleb. I'm just asking if you want to try. Try staying, try building, try being something other than a man haunted by failures he can't fix." He caught her hand in his, holding it against his scarred cheek. "I'm not an easy man to care about." "Good thing I'm not an easy woman to scare off." They stood there in the damaged mercantile, surrounded by broken glass and morning light, and something passed between them that felt like a beginning. Not a perfect one, not without complications or challenges, but real and solid and worth fighting for. The moment was interrupted by Sheriff Garrett appearing in the doorway, his weathered face showing something close to peace for the first time in years. "Miss Hartwell, Mr. Rourke, federal marshals just rode in. Want to take statements from everyone involved." "We'll be right there." Eliza reluctantly stepped back from Caleb, the real world reasserting itself. "Is Vernon talking?" Won't shut up, actually. Keeps demanding his lawyers, threatening lawsuits, insisting this is all a misunderstanding. But his men are singing like canaries now that they understand they can trade testimony for lighter sentences. We've got enough evidence to put Pike away for the rest of his natural life. And the canyon? The bodies? Garrett's expression darkened. 14 so far. Federal men are still excavating. Families are being notified where we can identify victims. It's going to be a long, painful process, but at least there'll be some closure, some justice. Justice. The word felt strange after so long without it. Eliza wondered if the families of Pike's victims would find comfort in his conviction, or if the loss would still ache regardless of legal consequences. But at least they'd know the truth. At least the men responsible would face reckoning. The federal marshals turned out to be exactly what Redwood Crossing needed: professional, thorough, and entirely unmoved by Vernon Pike's threats and bluster. Marshal James Crawford, a lean man with iron gray hair and sharp eyes, took statements from everyone involved, assembled evidence with meticulous care, and made it clear that territorial justice would be served regardless of Pike's connections or wealth. "We've been hearing rumors about corruption out here for years," Crawford told Eliza during her formal statement. "But rumors aren't evidence. What you and your father compiled, that's evidence. Real, documented, irrefutable proof of systematic fraud and murder. It's going to make this one of the biggest territorial cases we've prosecuted. Will it stick? Pike keeps insisting his lawyers will get him released. His lawyers can try, but when we've got bodies in a ravine on his property, signed confessions from his employees, financial records documenting bribery and fraud, and testimony from respected citizens, any judge who lets him walk will be inviting federal investigation of their own conduct." Crawford's smile was thin and cold. "Vernon Pike's reign is over, Miss Hartwell. I guarantee it." The trial happened faster than Eliza expected. Pike's lawyers tried every delay tactic imaginable, but Crawford had assembled such an overwhelming case that even compromised territorial judges couldn't justify postponement. 6 weeks after Vernon Pike's arrest, he stood in a Denver courtroom while a jury of his peers, none of them from Redwood Crossing, all carefully vetted for conflicts of interest, delivered their verdict. Guilty on 14 counts of murder, guilty on 23 counts of land fraud, guilty on conspiracy, bribery, intimidation, and a dozen other charges that added up to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. Eliza sat in the courtroom gallery, Caleb beside her, and watched Vernon Pike's face as the sentence was read. He'd aged 20 years and 6 weeks, his hair gone gray, his expensive clothes hanging loose on a frame that had lost its arrogant confidence. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, Vernon looked directly at Eliza. "It wasn't supposed to end like this," he said quietly. "I built an empire, made something out of nothing, and one woman's stubbornness tore it all down." "No," Eliza said, standing so he could see her clearly. "Your cruelty tore it down. Your belief that power meant you could take whatever you wanted. Your absolute certainty that people were things to be used and discarded. I just refused to be one of those things. The rest was your doing." Vernon looked like he wanted to argue, to justify, to explain how his crimes had been necessary or reasonable or somehow justified by ambition. But whatever he saw in Eliza's face must have told him the argument was lost. He sagged, suddenly old and broken, and let the marshals lead him away to begin a sentence that would end only with his death. Outside the courthouse, Redwood Crossing's delegation gathered in the autumn sunshine, merchants and families who'd traveled to Denver to witness justice served. Mrs. Chen hugged Eliza with fierce joy. Marcus Webb shook Caleb's hand with genuine gratitude. Even Sheriff Garrett managed to smile, his own legal troubles resolved with a reprimand and probation in exchange for his cooperation and testimony. "What now?" Margaret Sullivan asked, voicing what everyone was thinking. "Pike's gone, but his ranch still exists. His properties, his businesses, all that infrastructure he built on stolen land. What happens to it all?" "Federal government will auction most of it," Crawford explained, joining the group. "Proceeds will go to compensating Pike's victims, both the families of the murdered and the homesteaders who lost land to fraud. Won't make anyone whole, but it's something." "And Redwood Crossing itself?" Marcus asked. "Who runs things now that Pike's gone?" You do. Crawford looked around at the assembled citizens. All of you. That's how it's supposed to work in the territories. Communities governing themselves according to law and common sense. You've got a sheriff who's remembered his duty. You've got citizens willing to stand up for what's right. Seems to me you'll do just fine. The journey back to Redwood Crossing took 3 days. Eliza spent most of it watching the landscape roll past, thinking about her father and what he'd set in motion. Thomas Hartwell had never lived to see Vernon Pike brought to justice, but his daughter had finished what he started. His death had meaning now, purpose beyond simple tragedy. You're quiet, Caleb observed from his position driving the wagon, regretting any of it. Not even a little. You? I'm still here, aren't I? Could have left a dozen times since Pike's arrest. Could have collected my reward for exposing him and moved on to the next bounty. What stopped you? He glanced at her, gray eyes warm in ways she'd never seen before. You did. This town did. The idea that maybe I don't have to keep running from the past if I'm building something worth staying for. That a proposal, Mr. Rourke? Might be. Though I should warn you, I'm terrible at pretty speeches and romantic gestures. Most I can offer is a promise to stand by you, work hard, and try to be worthy of the faith you showed in a scarred drifter with more ghosts than sense. Eliza laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. I think I can work with that. They arrived in Redwood Crossing on a golden October afternoon. The town transformed in subtle ways that spoke to deeper changes. The fear that had colored every interaction was gone, replaced by cautious optimism. Shops that had closed under Pike's economic pressure were reopening. Families who'd fled were returning. Even the air felt different, cleaner somehow, like a weight had lifted. The mercantile had been repaired in their absence, the broken door replaced, the damaged goods reorganized. Inside, Eliza found a note from Mrs. Chen explaining that the community had worked together to restore what Vernon's men had destroyed. It was their way of saying thank you, of honoring Thomas Hartwell's memory, of proving that decency could rebuild what cruelty had broken. Home, Eliza said softly, running her hand along the familiar counter. Home, Caleb agreed, and the words sounded right in his mouth, like maybe he'd finally found a place to stop running, a reason to plant roots instead of just passing through. That evening, they stood together on the mercantile's porch, watching the town settle into peaceful darkness. Lamps glowed in windows, families gathered for dinner. The normal, precious rhythms of life continued, unmarred by fear for the first time in years. Thank you, Eliza said quietly. For everything. For standing between me and Pike. For believing I was worth protecting. For staying when you could have left. Thank you for giving me something worth staying for. Caleb wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. And for showing me that standing up to bullies isn't just about bounties or justice. Sometimes it's about protecting the people and places that make life worth living. They stood there as stars emerged overhead, two survivors who'd found each other in the midst of violence and chosen to build something better from the ruins. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, rebuilding trust, healing wounds, establishing new patterns of governance and commerce in a town emerging from tyranny never was. But they'd face it together, stronger for having survived the worst and discovered that courage could triumph over cruelty. In the morning, there would be work to do. The mercantile to run, the community to strengthen, lives to rebuild from Vernon Pike's ashes. But tonight was for standing together in the darkness, grateful for survival, hopeful for tomorrow, and absolutely certain that they'd made the right choice. They'd stood when the world expected them to kneel. And in standing, they'd proven that even the most powerful tyrant was ultimately just a man, and men could be stopped. The work of rebuilding began the very next morning, though not in the way Eliza expected. She woke to find a line of people already forming outside the mercantile, families clutching lists and coins saved from months of careful budgeting. With Vernon Pike's stranglehold on credit and commerce broken, Redwood Crossing was eager to spend money without fear of retribution, to conduct business as free citizens rather than subjects paying tribute to a tyrant. Didn't expect this, Caleb observed, watching the queue from the upstairs window. He'd taken the small room at the end of the hall permanently now, his few possessions unpacked in a way that suggested genuine permanence rather than temporary shelter. Neither did I. Eliza tied her apron, feeling the familiar weight of her father's mercantile settling around her shoulders, but lighter now, without the crushing burden of debt and intimidation. Guess people have been waiting for permission to live normal lives again. They worked side by side all morning, Eliza managing transactions while Caleb handled inventory and heavy lifting. The rhythm came naturally, their movements coordinating without need for discussion. When Mrs. Chen arrived with fresh bread and asked if they needed help with the crowd, Eliza found herself saying yes without hesitation, accepting assistance that would have felt like weakness under Pike's reign. By noon, the mercantile's shelves were noticeably depleted and Eliza's cash box was fuller than it had been in months. She was restocking fabric bolts when Sheriff Garrett appeared, his expression troubled in ways that made her stomach tighten. "What's wrong?" she asked, anxiety spiking. "Did something happen with Pike's trial? Did his lawyers find a loophole?" "No, nothing like that. Pike's locked up tight in Denver, won't see freedom again." Garrett removed his hat, turning it in weathered hands. "It's about the canyon. The federal men finished excavating yesterday. Final count is 17 bodies. 17 families destroyed so Vernon Pike could expand his property lines." The number hit like a physical blow. 17. Not abstract victims, but real people with names and lives and families who'd mourned them. Eliza gripped the counter for support, her voice coming out strained. "Have they been identified?" "Most of them. Dental records, personal effects, missing person reports. Marshal Crawford's notifying next of kin now." Garrett's lined face showed every one of his years. "But there's something else, something I need to tell you before you hear it elsewhere." Caleb appeared from the back room, drawn by the tension in Garrett's voice. "Sheriff? Your father, Miss Eliza, Thomas Hartwell. We had the Denver coroner examine his remains like you requested. Found traces of arsenic in the bone tissue, exactly like Jacob Pierce testified. So we know for certain now, Pike murdered him. Slow and deliberate, watching him waste away while pretending to be a concerned neighbor." Eliza had known, of course. Had suspected from the moment Caleb first raised the possibility, had gathered evidence and testimony confirming it. But hearing official confirmation, understanding that her father's last months had been spent in agony caused by calculated malice, made something crack in her chest. "How long?" Her voice barely qualified as a whisper. "How long was Pike poisoning him?" "Coroner estimates 4 to 5 months based on accumulation levels. Started around the time Thomas began compiling evidence about the land fraud." 5 months. 5 months of watching her father decline, of holding his hand through coughing fits, of reading to him when he was too weak to hold a book himself. 5 months of being told it was consumption, natural illness, just bad luck. And all of it lies. All of it murder. "I should have seen it," she said, the words bitter on her tongue. "Should have questioned Brennan's diagnosis, insisted on a second opinion, done something instead of just accepting, 'You couldn't have known.'" Caleb's hand found her shoulder, steady and warm. Pike and Brennan were careful. They made it look exactly like consumption. Even a suspicious mind would have struggled to see through it. "Your father would want you to know he didn't suffer for nothing," Garrett added quietly. "The evidence he compiled, the stand he took against Pike. It saved this town. Saved everyone Pike would have victimized if he'd remained in power. Thomas Hartwell died fighting, Miss Eliza. That's worth something." "Is it?" The question burst out before she could stop it, grief and anger twisting together. "Is it worth 17 bodies in a canyon? Worth 5 months of slow death? Worth all the families destroyed and lives ruined? Or did decent people just pay the price for everyone else's cowardice?" The accusation hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Garrett flinched like she'd struck him, but he didn't defend himself. How could he? He'd admitted his own complicity, his years of looking away while Vernon Pike murdered and stole and destroyed. "You're right," the sheriff said after a long silence. "We were cowards. All of us who knew something was wrong but chose safety over conscience. Your father paid the price for our weakness, and there's nothing I can say or do that will ever make that right." "No," Eliza agreed, her voice hard. "There isn't. But you can make sure his death meant something. You can be the lawman this town needs instead of the one Pike bought. You can stand up next time instead of waiting until someone else bleeds first." "I intend to, starting with this." Garrett pulled an envelope from his coat pocket. Federal government's auctioning Pike's properties next month. His ranch, his business interests, everything. Marshall Crawford suggested the town might want to pool resources, buy the ranch collectively, turn it into something useful, maybe a cooperative for small ranchers, or land that gets distributed to homesteaders who lost property to Pike's fraud. That's a lot of money, more than Redwood Crossing has. There's also Pike's personal accounts. The territorial judge ruled that since his wealth was acquired through criminal means, it gets seized and redistributed to victims. Your father's estate, meaning you, is entitled to a substantial portion as compensation for his murder. Eliza stared at the envelope, understanding what it represented. Blood money. Payment for her father's life. Calculated by lawyers and judges who'd never met Thomas Hartwell, never heard his laugh, or witnessed his stubborn integrity. Money that couldn't bring him back or erase the months of suffering he'd endured. How much? She asked, not sure she wanted to know. $47,000, your share based on documented losses and pain and suffering. The number was staggering, life-changing, enough to expand the mercantile, buy property, secure her future for decades, enough to prove that her father's stand against Vernon Pike had value, even measured in the cold arithmetic of legal compensation. I want it used for the town, Eliza said, the decision forming even as she spoke. For buying Pike's ranch collectively, for compensating families who lost loved ones, for building something good from all this blood and grief. My father died fighting for this community. His compensation should serve the same purpose. Garrett's eyes widened. Miss Eliza, that's your money. You're entitled to keep it. Use it however you see fit. Nobody would fault you for... I'm not keeping blood money, Sheriff. I'm investing it in making sure what happened to my father never happens again. That's what he would have wanted. She looked at Caleb, half expecting argument, but found only quiet respect in his gray eyes. He understood, she realized. Understood that some things mattered more than personal security, that healing required more than individual compensation. Then we'll put it to good use, Garrett promised, accepting the envelope back. I'll work with Marshall Crawford on establishing a trust, making sure every dollar serves the community. Your father would be proud, Miss Eliza. After the sheriff left, Eliza stood in the quiet mercantile, feeling the weight of her choice settling into place. $47,000. A fortune by any measure. Gone in a moment of decision that felt both reckless and absolutely right. Second thoughts? Caleb asked, reading her expression with unsettling accuracy. No, yes, I don't know. She moved to the window, watching Redwood Crossing's Main Street bustle with afternoon commerce. That money could have secured everything, made me independent, powerful in my own right, and I just gave it away. You invested it in something more valuable than independence. You invested it in community, in making sure Vernon Pike's legacy is rebuilding rather than destruction. Caleb joined her at the window. That takes courage most people don't have. Or it takes being too stubborn to accept that justice is measured in dollars and cents rather than actual change. Maybe both. He was quiet for a moment then. When I left Tennessee after the war, after finding my family dead, I had a choice. Could have taken the money from selling our burned farm, started fresh somewhere safe and comfortable. Instead, I spent it all tracking the men who killed my parents. 2 years hunting them across 3 territories, burning through every dollar for information and supplies and bribes. Did you regret it? Every day. Because when it was over, when I'd found 2 of the 3 and delivered justice with my revolver, I had nothing left. No money, no home, no purpose except drifting from one bounty to the next. I'd chosen revenge over rebuilding, and it hollowed me out. He turned to face her, his scarred face serious in the afternoon light. What you just did, choosing community over personal wealth, that's the opposite of my mistake. That's choosing to build instead of destroy. And it's going to make a difference, Eliza. Maybe not immediately, maybe not in ways that feel satisfying right now. But years from now, when this town is thriving and people remember why, your father's name will mean something beyond victim. It'll mean the foundation everything good was built on. Eliza felt tears threatening, held back through sheer stubborn will. I miss him. I know that's obvious and expected, but I miss him so much it feels like being hollowed out. And I'm angry that I don't get to share this with him, don't get to show him that his fight mattered. He died thinking he'd failed, thinking Pike would win. And I can't ever tell him he was wrong. He knew. Caleb's voice was gentle, certain. Men like your father, they don't fight because they expect to see victory. They fight because fighting is the only choice that lets them look themselves in the mirror. He knew what standing up to Pike would cost, and he did it anyway. That's not failure, Eliza. That's heroism. She let herself cry then, grief finally spilling over in the safety of the mercantile that had been her father's dream. Caleb held her through it, steady and patient, offering the kind of strength that didn't demand she be strong in return. When the tears finally subsided, she felt lighter. Not healed exactly, but no longer carrying the weight alone. The weeks that followed brought transformation to Redwood Crossing, subtle at first, then gathering momentum. Marshal Crawford worked with community leaders to establish democratic governance, replacing Pike's bought and paid-for officials with elected representatives. Sheriff Garrett ran unopposed, his testimony against Pike having earned grudging respect even from those who remembered his years of complicity. The ranch auction became a community event, families pooling resources to buy land that was then redistributed to homesteaders Pike had displaced. The cooperative model Garrett suggested took root, smaller ranchers working together in ways Vernon Pike's competitive brutality had never allowed. Within a month, the landscape itself seemed different, the same mountains and valleys, but no longer shadowed by one man's malevolent control. Dr. Brennan fled before charges could be filed, disappearing into the territories with whatever money he'd managed to hide. Some said he'd gone to California, others Mexico. Eliza didn't care where he ran as long as he stayed gone, though she made sure his medical license was revoked throughout Colorado and neighboring territories. Let him practice his poison somewhere else, if anywhere would have him once word spread about his role in Thomas Hartwell's murder. The mercantile thrived in ways her father had always dreamed but never quite achieved under Pike's economic stranglehold. Eliza expanded inventory, hired help for the first time, and began carrying goods from regional artisans and craftspeople. The store became a gathering place, somewhere people came not just to buy supplies but to connect with community, to share news and support each other through the ongoing work of rebuilding. Caleb settled into the role of deputy sheriff with surprising ease, his skills as a tracker and gunfighter translating well to maintaining order in a town learning to govern itself. He was fair but firm, the kind of lawman who commanded respect through competence rather than fear. And every evening he returned to the small room above the mercantile, to dinners with Eliza and quiet conversations that felt like coming home. 3 months after Vernon Pike's conviction, on a crisp December evening with snow threatening in heavy clouds, Caleb asked Eliza to take a walk with him. They bundled against the cold and headed out of town, following a trail that wound toward the foothills where aspens stood bare and beautiful against gathering dusk. "Where are we going?" Eliza asked, her breath fogging in the cold air. "Somewhere I've been working on. Wanted to show you before the snow makes it inaccessible." They walked for perhaps 20 minutes, conversation easy and comfortable, until they reached a small clearing overlooking Redwood Crossing. Someone had cleared the space recently, removing underbrush and fallen timber. At the clearing's center stood a simple wooden marker, freshly carved and carefully positioned. Eliza approached slowly, reading the inscription by fading daylight. Thomas Hartwell, 1828, 1878. He stood when others knelt. He fought when others fled. His courage saved a town. Below the words, someone had carved a detailed scene, a man standing firm while others bowed around him, his hand extended not in supplication but in defiance. It was beautiful work, the kind that took hours of painstaking effort and genuine skill. "You did this," Eliza whispered, touching the marker with trembling fingers. "The carving, yes. The words are from the territorial governor's official commendation. He recognized your father posthumously for his investigation into Pike's crimes. Seemed right to put them somewhere permanent, somewhere people could come to remember what he did. But this isn't where he's buried. The cemetery this is where he'd want to be remembered." Caleb gestured toward the view. Redwood Crossing spread below them like a promise. Looking down on the town he saved, surrounded by the mountains he loved, his grave is for mourning. This is for celebrating what he accomplished. Eliza couldn't speak past the tightness in her throat. She'd thought grief would fade with Pike's conviction, that justice would somehow make the loss hurt less. But standing here, seeing her father's courage immortalized in wood and words, she understood that grief and pride could coexist, that she could miss him desperately while also honoring what he'd given. "Thank you," she managed finally. It's perfect." "There's more." Caleb pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket, his expression uncertain in a way she'd never seen before. "Been thinking about what you said months ago, about trying, about staying and building instead of drifting, and I realized I've been holding back, keeping one foot out the door in case things went wrong. Caleb, let me finish before I lose my nerve." He unfolded the paper, revealing an official document. "This is a deed to 40 acres bordering the mercantile property. It came up in the Pike auction, and I bought it using money I've saved over the years. Good land, decent water source, room to build." Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs, not quite daring to hope she understood what he was offering. "I'm not good with pretty words," Caleb continued, his gray eyes holding hers with fierce intensity. "Can't promise you romance like storybook heroes or the kind of comfortable life you'd get from marrying someone stable and sensible. What I can promise is that I'll stand with you, work beside you, and fight for you the way you fought for this town. I can promise loyalty and honesty and effort to be worthy of the faith you showed in me." He took a breath, steadying himself. "So I'm asking, will you marry me, Eliza Hartwell? Will you take a chance on a scarred drifter who's trying very hard to become the kind of man who deserves you?" For a moment, Eliza couldn't breathe. Marriage, partnership, a future built together instead of simply surviving side by side. She thought about her father's dreams for her, about the woman in Denver who'd conducted business on her own terms, about the path she'd imagined before Vernon Pike's shadow had consumed everything. Then she thought about the man standing before her, damaged and honest, brave in ways that mattered, willing to risk vulnerability after years of emotional armor. She thought about how they'd faced down a tyrant together, how they worked in comfortable synchronization, how his presence had transformed her mercantile from a battleground into a home. "Yes," she said, the word simple and certain. "Yes, I'll marry you." The smile that crossed Caleb's scarred face was like sunrise, slow and brilliant and transformative. He pulled her close, his kiss gentle at first, then deepening with months of restrained feeling finally allowed expression. They stood there in the clearing as snow began to fall, soft flakes catching in Eliza's hair and melting on Caleb's coat. The town their courage had saved spread below them like a benediction. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "I never thought I'd get this. Never thought I deserved it after the mistakes I made, the people I failed to save. But you make me believe second chances are real." "They are. We both got one." Eliza looked down at Redwood Crossing, lights beginning to glow in windows as families gathered for evening meals. "My father got his second chance too, in a way. He died fighting, but his fight won. Vernon Pike thought he could silence dissent by murdering one stubborn merchant, but all he did was prove why standing up matters. Your father would be proud of you, proud of what you've built, how you've honored his memory." "I hope so. I hope he'd be proud of both of us. The merchant's daughter who refused to kneel, and the drifter who finally stopped running." She laced her fingers through Caleb's, feeling the calluses and scars that told their own story of survival. "When should we do this? The wedding?" "Whenever you want. Tomorrow, next month, next year. I'm not going anywhere." "Spring," Eliza decided. "After the snow melts and the aspens bloom, we'll have the ceremony here in this clearing where you built the memorial. Start our marriage surrounded by what we fought for." "Spring it is." Caleb kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. "Should probably head back before we freeze. Besides, Mrs. Chen is going to want all the details, and you know how she gets when she's the last to hear important news." They walked back to town hand in hand, their future settling into place with each step. Behind them, the memorial stood watch over Redwood Crossing, a reminder carved in wood that courage mattered, that standing up to tyranny cost something, but surrender cost more. The engagement announcement spread through Redwood Crossing like wildfire, met with universal approval and no small amount of relief. People had watched Eliza and Caleb work together for months, seen how they complemented each other, how their partnership had been forged in crisis and tempered by shared purpose. The wedding felt less like a surprise and more like an inevitability everyone had been waiting for. Mrs. Chen took charge of planning with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting for this moment since Caleb first stepped between Eliza and Vernon Pike. Margaret Sullivan insisted on making the dress, spending hours on intricate details that transformed simple fabric into something extraordinary. Marcus Webb crafted a set of rings from silver mined in the territories, simple bands engraved with words from the memorial. He stood when others knelt. As spring approached and plans solidified, Eliza found herself thinking often about the woman she'd been 8 months ago, terrified, grieving, convinced that Vernon Pike's power was absolute. That woman had stood in this same mercantile, knocked down in the street, bleeding and broken, wondering if resistance was even possible. She'd come so far since then. They all had. The wedding took place on a brilliant May morning, aspens leafed out in shimmering green, wildflowers carpeting the clearing in purple and gold. The entire town made the trek to the memorial site, families dressed in their finest, carrying baskets of food and instruments for music. It wasn't the formal church ceremony tradition demanded, but it felt more real, more honest than any conventional service could have been. Sheriff Garrett officiated, his weathered face showing pride and something like redemption. He'd found his way back to being a lawman worthy of the badge, and standing before this gathering of people he'd once failed, marrying the woman whose father he'd failed to protect, seemed to complete some circuit of healing. "We gather here today," Garrett began, his voice carrying across the clearing, "to witness the union of Eliza Hartwell and Caleb Rourke, two people who proved that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the choice to stand anyway. Two people who saved this town by refusing to surrender to tyranny." Eliza barely heard the rest of the ceremony, her attention fixed on Caleb's gray eyes, on the way he looked at her like she was something precious and miraculous. When the moment came to exchange vows, she spoke from her heart rather than from tradition. "I promise to stand with you," she said, her voice steady despite tears threatening. "To fight beside you when fighting is necessary, and to build with you when the battles are done. I promise to see you clearly, all your scars and ghosts and hard edges, and choose you anyway every day for as long as we both live." Caleb's response was simpler, but no less meaningful. "I promise to stay, to put down roots instead of running, to be the man you believed I could be even when I didn't believe it myself, and I promise to honor your father's memory by helping you build the world he fought for." They sealed the vows with rings and kisses, with applause and cheers from the gathered community. Then the celebration began, music and food and dancing, children running wild through the aspens, families reuniting with loved ones who'd traveled from distant territories for the occasion. As afternoon faded toward evening, Eliza found herself standing with Caleb at the clearing's edge, watching Redwood Crossing glow gold in the sunset. The town looked different from up here, not just physically, though growth and rebuilding had changed its shape, but fundamentally transformed. No longer Vernon Pike's fiefdom, no longer a place ruled by fear and silence. Just a community of people trying to build good lives, supporting each other through challenges, governed by law and common decency rather than one tyrant's whims. "Are you happy?" Caleb asked, his arm around her waist. "Happier than I ever thought I'd be after losing my father." Eliza leaned into his warmth, feeling complete in ways she'd never expected. "I wish he could be here. Wish he could see what his courage built." Maybe he can. Maybe somewhere, somehow, Thomas Hartwell knows his daughter married a man who'll stand with her, knows his town is thriving, knows his fight wasn't in vain. Caleb's voice was soft, thoughtful. "I'd like to believe that. Like to think death doesn't erase what we accomplish or who we touch." "Me too." Eliza touched the memorial marker, feeling the grain of wood beneath her fingers. "I used to think justice meant Pike suffering the way he made others suffer. But standing here now, seeing what we've built from the ruins he left behind, I realize justice is bigger than punishment. It's transformation. It's taking everything he destroyed and using it to create something he could never have imagined." Your father would agree with that. He wasn't fighting for revenge. He was fighting for possibility. For a town where people could live free of intimidation and fear. And we gave him that. We finished what he started. They stood together as stars emerged overhead, the wedding celebration continuing around them with music and laughter, the gathered community a living testament to what courage could accomplish. In the morning, they'd return to Redwood Crossing as husband and wife, to the mercantile and the deputy's office, to the ordinary sacred work of building a life together. But tonight was for remembering how they'd gotten here, for honoring the man who'd stood first, who'd paid the ultimate price for believing resistance mattered, for acknowledging that every good thing they'd built had been purchased with blood and grief and stubborn refusal to surrender. Eliza thought about Vernon Pike, locked away in a Denver prison, his empire dissolved, his name synonymous with cruelty and corruption. He'd wanted to be remembered as powerful, influential, a man who built something that would outlast him. Instead, he'd become a cautionary tale, proof that power built on fear and violence was ultimately hollow, that tyranny could be toppled by ordinary people who simply refused to kneel. And she thought about her father, whose memorial stood watch over the town he'd saved. Thomas Hartwell had been ordinary too in most ways, a merchant, a widower, a man who loved books and believed in fairness. But he'd made the extraordinary choice to stand when standing was dangerous, to fight when fighting seemed hopeless. And in doing so, he'd shown his daughter and an entire community what courage looked like. "Thank you," Eliza whispered to the memorial, to the memory of her father, to whatever part of him still existed in the world. "Thank you for teaching me that some things are worth fighting for, that surrender isn't safety, it's just slow death, that we get to choose what we stand for, and that choice matters more than we can imagine." The wind rustled through the aspens, carrying the scent of spring flowers and pine. If Eliza let herself imagine, she could almost hear her father's voice in that wind, telling her he was proud, that she'd done well, that her happiness mattered as much as her courage. "Ready to head back?" Caleb asked as the celebration began winding down, families collecting children and leftover food. "Almost." Eliza took one last look at the view, committing it to memory, the town spread below, the mountains rising beyond, the sky vast and full of stars. "I want to remember this moment when everything that seemed impossible became real. We'll come back. Every year on our anniversary, we'll climb up here and remember how it started, how a woman stood up to a tyrant and won, how a drifter finally found home, how courage triumphed over cruelty. Promise?" "Promise." Caleb kissed her, sealing the vow. "Now come on, Mrs. Rourke. Let's go home." Mrs. Rourke. The name settled around Eliza like a familiar coat, comfortable and right. She wasn't just the merchant's daughter anymore, wasn't defined by her father's death or Vernon Pike's villainy. She was Eliza Rourke, partner to a good man, proprietor of a thriving business, citizen of a town transformed by shared courage. They walked down the mountain path hand in hand, their community surrounding them with warmth and goodwill, heading toward a future they'd earned through stubbornness and sacrifice and absolute refusal to surrender. Behind them, Thomas Hartwell's memorial stood eternal watch, a reminder carved in wood and consecrated by love that standing up always mattered, even when, especially when, the cost was high. And ahead, Redwood Crossing waited in the darkness, its lights glowing like promises kept, like justice served, like proof that ordinary people choosing courage could change the world. The battle was over, the tyrant had fallen, the victims had been honored, and the survivors were healing. And in a small mercantile on Main Street, above a counter where her father had taught her the value of honest work and fair dealing, Eliza Rourke would build a life worthy of his sacrifice, would raise children who knew their grandfather's story, who understood that freedom required vigilance and courage required community, would create from the ashes of Vernon Pike's cruelty something beautiful and enduring, a legacy not of fear, but of hope. Because that was what standing up to bullies meant. Not just defeating them, though that mattered, but transforming what they'd corrupted into something better than it had been before they arrived. Building on foundations of courage rather than terror. Choosing love over hate, community over power, principle over convenience. Thomas Hartwell had stood when others knelt. His daughter had finished what he started. And together, through sacrifice and stubbornness and absolute certainty that some things were worth fighting for, they'd proven that even in the darkest times, even against the most powerful tyrants, courage could triumph. The gunslinger's promise had been kept. Vernon Pike would never touch her again, and Redwood Crossing, Colorado, would never kneel to anyone.